Welcome to Dead Genre Chronicles, the book club-style podcast about a genre of games that's dead as a doornail despite new entries that the average person cares about coming out every third year. Every month, DGC will be playing through a JRPG decided on by the host, and we invite you to play along and send us your questions and thoughts on it. I'm your host, Evan, and we're back up to the full original cast with myself, RJ.
Hi.
LeeRoy.
Hi.
And Austin.
Sup?
On this episode, we're going to be talking about Resonance of Fate, a JRPG on PS3 and Xbox 360 made by Tri-Ace, the developers behind everyone's favorite knockoff Tales series, Star Ocean, and the Valkyrie Profile games. Also, we decided the episode title we came up with wasn't as good as it could be, so we changed it to Super Hexagun-kata. Wow, that's
got
that's
so
a mouthful.
close.
Super Hexagun-kata.
Yeah, that's a mouthful, and I got up to that without fucking up. Good job, me.
Why the fuck is this clipping so hard? Sorry,
It's
my
a
microphone.
mystery.
I'm just going to have to try and talk quietly.
Due to the nature of this game and its story, this episode has a content warning for discussion of suicide. Since RJ's focused on games from the 7th generation of consoles, I'm going to let him open the floor for discussion.
Yeah, so, this is one of the games on my list for my big project of games I'm talking about. Because I picked as my period to focus on basically FF12 to FF13. Because that, for me, is when this idea that there is a crisis in JRPGs, or the genre's in crisis, or the genre is dying, that's where all of that got started. And I found out recently, I was reading a paper, it's actually kind of a business marketing type paper about Japanese media, that in about 2010, the Japanese government itself declared that Japanese media was struggling in the international market. The problem got so bad that the Japanese government had to intervene and kind of centralize a marketing strategy for this stuff. Because if you look at the late 90s into 2000 and 2002-3-ish, there's this huge glut of massive breakout successes. In games, you have FF7, Metal Gear Solid, Ocarina of Time, those sorts of games. Mm-hmm. You have Spirited Away wins an Oscar. You have The Animatrix. You have that anime bit in a Tarantino film, Kill Bill. And this thing developed that gets called Cool Japan.
Oh, God,
and that but that lasted for a while, and then in about 2004, things start to go wrong. It just peters out, basically, the moment it passed.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, and then, 2006, FF12, probably the first really divisive Final Fantasy game. And I'm sure at some point on this podcast...
Since 7 had come out, yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure at some point on this podcast, Austin and I will get really divided over FF12, but another day. And the other thing that happens specifically in games at this point is the Xbox. For the first time in a very long time, you have an American-developed console with American-developed games for an American audience, just chewing up the console market. And the PS3 is out, but it's difficult to develop for. You get a set of JRPGs on the Xbox, really kind of far from home. And some really interesting games come out at that period. You have, this is one of them, but also Tales of Vesperia is in there. The Last Remnant is a very weird JRPG. Eternal Sonata, Blue Dragon. A bunch of things that aren't quite what we expect from JRPGs, but no major franchise titles. And this kind of perception of a lull in JRPGs being a big part of gaming, as we waited basically for the first Gen 7 Final Fantasy, which turned out to be FF13, which happens, and FF13 is almost to the month the same time as Resonance of Fate, particularly in the West.
It's a week apart.
In the West. Out in Japan a couple of months earlier. You know what the other game that came out in the same quarter, other major new JRPG title is?
Ooh, I know it. Is it Nier?
Nope.
Wait? Oh, in the same quarter. No, it did come out in the same year. But yeah.
Birth by Sleep.
Really?
Oh.
Birth by Sleep is
nice.
On my list of when JRPGs come out is right next to FF13 and on the same row as Resonance of Fate. So you can almost it's almost plausible to say this was the start of the clawback, but there's no question in my mind that Resonance of Fate particularly is really clearly shaped by this idea of being a JRPG that was partly developed for an American audience. Like, it's in the graphical style, it's in the structure of the game, it's in the fact that they chose to make a game with kind of Western cinematic gunplay in. It's in the fact that this is fundamentally a Western in some ways. All of this stuff is a westernization of, or an attempted westernization of a genre that's perceived to be struggling in the West. Because by this point, 2009-10, the perception of the crisis is definitely cemented. Like, I can give you quotes from major kind of mass media game journalist people like Yahtzee, just completely dunking on the entire genre.
Final Fantasy 13 was definitely like the, okay, something is really wrong moment. You know? Like something happened to this genre. What happened? We were doing fine like 5 years ago. What the fuck? You know?
Yeah, and for the record, I don't want to... Like, at some point we'll discuss FF13 as well. I don't want to dunk on it too much because I think there's a lot of merit in it that doesn't come across when you play it.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
I've played it and hated it myself, but I think there's a lot of merit there.
No, you're completely right. It's just that's the perfect phrase to describe FF13. Well, it's fine when you think about it.
much the same is true of Resonance of Fate, though. I mean, it's like there's clearly a moment happening here in JRPGs. It's not far off from Star Ocean 4 as well, came out about the same time. And Star Ocean is always a mess.
Yup.
And it's... You know what the saddest thing is? It's 2 months after Vesperia PS3. Which Devin and I can't mention without bursting into tears. And it's right out after Tales of Graces as well.
Which we can do without, really, but it led to Zestiria, so I'm good with it.
Yeah. You and I will fight if we bring up Graces. So that's kind of the historical context, and that's where my interest in the game comes from. And I've kind of already hinted that we found this game, I think we all, in our different ways, found this game a pain to play or to navigate or to make our way through.
I probably liked it the most, and I would describe it as... Let's put it this way. I would say that Resonance of Fate probably has my favorite combat system ever in a JRPG, and I would describe the game as a total as being thoroughly disappointing.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, the game is really dense, and it doesn't encourage play at all, and which is really weird because they stuff it full of things they want you to do, and no accommodations to do them.
Yeah, like, there's so much content, #content, in the game, and so much of it is just doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, like, and this is the thing too, is like it struck me when I was first playing it, and I was just going to approach it like I had approached every JRPG for the longest time, was I'm just going to play the main story stuff, and then I realized at some point that the game is structured as such that they expect you to do, at the very least, every single side quest that is offered, that is on the boards. They expect you to do all of it in every playthrough of the game. Now, granted, still only adds up to 50 hours, whereas, say, with like Xenoblade Chronicles X, it's supposed to add up to 100 hours, which, don't get me started. But
Xenoblade Chronicles X is like 40 hours until you get your mount. That's not...
I think the way the first Xenoblade works, it's about 100 hours to get through the main story.
That's just a critical path run,
average.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So you're probably hitting...
Not that you can actually do a critical path run of Xenoblade
No,
Chronicles. But...
it's kind of like you have to mix around side quests and the main quest, because you're always going to hit walls like an MMO.
Hey, Devin, I'm going to... okay, can we all take a pause real quick just so I can say something about technical stuff?
All right.
Daddy does not approve!
Okay, where were we?
Xenoblade Chronicles, God forbid.
God, yeah, God forbid, Xenoblade Chronicles.
That's the one thing we can all agree on.
I think by the time this actually comes out, Friday?
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna try and have it for... Well, fuck it. I'm writing a review of Xenoblade Chronicles X, and I'm working on playing the game right now, and it's just, oh my god, it's all the same problems, and it's just, it's so... Tetsuya, it's like, okay, here's the thing. I expect a disappointing, over-designed, and poorly written game from Tri-Ace. I don't expect a pile of JRPG cliches from Tetsuya Takahashi and Sori Yasaga, you know? Like, it's just...
You didn't exactly finish the first game, which was...
That's
loaded with-
true, but I also expected them to only make one bad game.
They've stated in interviews that they're trying to emulate Bethesda. I can't even say their name.
Bethesda.
Yeah, they're trying to emulate Bethesda in their games. Like, and it's clearly apparent that's all they're doing.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Well, the thing is that they're emulating Bethesda, but like Japanese developers, and actually this is a great place to start with Resonance of Fate. Japanese developers are historically extremely bad at understanding the appeal of the side quest in the Western RPG, because the point of a side quest in a Western RPG is that it's like a self-contained vignette type story on the side, or at least something that helps explain, some particular details of the world. Like, you learn about, even like some of the really, really simple shit, even some of the really, really simple shit in, sorry, I just saw a message from someone and my brain got distracted. Even some of the really, really simple shit in Fallout 3. There we go. I got it.
There we go.
Even some of like the really early stuff in Fallout 3, like you going to the pharmacy or whatever, to steal food from the raiders. It's just like, well, you kind of understand how the raiders work. It's like, well, they plant down in this place and they shoot up everyone and they take their resources and they live in this place where they can collect all the stuff and put down their bedspreads and things like that, and they sleep in unconventional ways because they have like bed mats like behind the cashier's register, and and then when you get to like a side quest in a Japanese game, it's like, hey, I need this item, go get this item and get it for me, and then yay, that's it. And
my conjecture with that is like more that the kind of Western RPGs that are popular in Japan were never Bethesda games, were never those content machines. It was MMORPGs. So when they interpret their side quests, they're just going off MMORPGs, which is the more cultural, familiar thing to the Japanese developers and players. But it doesn't, it's not the same framework, and it's not as satisfying. It's just like it's a misunderstanding of Bethesda, but it's coming from a place of understanding. It's just a different framework.
It's also worth noting that when kind of Japanese style side quests work, they're doing something completely different, and they have a legitimate goal in themselves, which is much more to do with some of it is metatextual and some of it is kind of pacing things out. And if you take the Bethesda RPG model and treat those side quests purely as pacing, they just become padding. And that very much is what happened here, I think, with Resonance of Fate.
I think a metaphor I kind of came up with at some point for Western versus Japanese RPGs and their side quests are basically like Japanese games usually have a meatier like main storyline that they want you to follow, and Western RPGs tend to have kind of a thinner one on content, so they pad out like all the thing, they wrap it around like it's kind of padding the if you were thinking in terms of like ropes, it's like a corded rope and there's lots of little strands which work around it and strengthen the whole thing, but Japanese ones just kind of have the main thing, and all the other ones just do different things than the main point of the game.
Or in Resonance of Fate, it's frayed and they're just dangling.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. There were like a few. I think RJ and I were maybe about to say the same thing, so I'll say mine first. There are a few ones where like there's like a consistent set of side quests between chapters where you kind of like a character or like a set of characters that like each have a thing that they need. Like there's that guy who has the girl in the wheelchair who consistently needs like parts for the wheelchair or like medicine.
There's the chef.
There's the chef.
Is another one.
And the chef has a relationship with his mom, and there's like tiny little things where I kind of go, okay, yeah, this is kind of cute and it's cool. But as the game world stretches out to like the very upper levels and very lower levels of Chandelier is like the top level. What's Basil?
Yep, Basil.
Yeah. As you get to the further and further into the lower and upper levels of Basel, like the levels of that just stops happening. Like. And especially because like the side quests just get more and more ridiculous. Like, hey, I just a monster stole my thing, and then you realize the monster that stole their thing was like a level 500 fuck off thing that would have killed them. Like,
yeah.
Well, at least for one of them, there is another hunter who can't finish any of his jobs, and he keeps asking you guys to do his jobs for him. So
that was a pretty fun one.
Yeah, that's that guy.
He's doing a chain of jobs, and then you're fighting a level 500 fuck off in those because he can't do it.
Yeah, I thought that one was kind of cute. Yeah.
So yeah, the side quest structure of this game is rubbish.
Dull.
Is the takeaway?
Even with the small amount of world building that we just established, it doesn't really tie into the main themes because the story of the game is so central and esoteric. It's literally only at the top level of government in the world of Basel, and so all these other interactions do not tie in whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is that RJ, you can go first this time.
Sorry, they're much more about the kind of the standard JRPG thing of you being the special characters who can go everywhere and do everything, and everyone else in the world is confined to their location, and it has that very standard structure to the side quests, whereas the narrative of this game is completely antithetical to that. At the structure level, at the content level, every part of the narrative is much more about, okay, you do knob around with the elites, like you are kind of part of the elite, but it's much more about what it's like to be part of the elite than it is about the relationship of the elites to people lower down the social order. And like the social order is visually dramatized by this tower. So it's like you don't get to... It doesn't play into the tension between the privileged and the unprivileged. So you've got the side quests which are all relating to the unprivileged people, and they feel irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because
and then the side quests you have where you do something for the government, where they you literally get a side quest that says it's from the bishop, not the bishops.
The Cardinals.
The Cardinals. It's from the Cardinals, and it says, we have a group of rebels on level 5, you need to take them out. And it's just like,
you act as a private army all the time, and like that.
And that's actually oh my god, we have something where the government is not using their official military to try and put down political rebellions, against this horrendous class structure.
There's a chapter in which, you have to go put down a dude who's hanging out in a quartz mine, and Vacheron has the line, "I never question the motives of my betters."
Well, that's because only when he's getting paid, at least.
Yeah. Except then he decides to kill someone on the house in the last chapter, so...
Well, that is the one bit of character that he gets.
That's Vacheron's quote-unquote character development going on there.
Yeah, nobody in this... This is another thing that structurally is very interesting about the game. It's terrible, but I mean, just credit where credit is due, is that all of the characters in this game are kind of fixed. They're just as developed as they're ever going to be. And that's, you get the same Vacheron in Chapter 1 that you get in Chapter 12. How many chapters are there total? 13,
16.
I think? 16? Okay.
Actually, I would leave that just to Vacheron, because Zephyr and Leanne both have... They both end up depending on each other, and they kind of turn around, and...
There is a relationship that develops there, but I think, I would agree with Austin, but I think that's partly because this game is, the actual plot of it is a forensic thing.
Let's put it this way. Let's put it this way. There's three major characters. There's only three major characters in this game. There's only 3 player characters in this game, and one of them has almost no development whatsoever. Whereas, in another JRPG, you have 7 characters, and probably all of them have a character arc.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. The point I was trying to make is that you start kind of at the end of these characters' journeys. The things that happen in this game are very much the end of a journey.
Yeah.
And the story is all flashbacks. Mm-hmm. It's all about how did we get to this place?
You may ask yourself.
Sorry?
That was a how did I get here? It's a Talking Heads joke.
Oh, right. But the sorry, you've derailed me. What was I saying?
Sorry.
Yeah. I kind of thematically.
It's about how everybody got to where they're going.
Yeah. So thematically, a lot of what actually happens in the game is about this idea of stasis. The world is a broken clock, and day and night don't follow an orderly schedule anymore.
I want to say not only is it's a literal clock tower. Actually, the whole entire tower is a literal clock tower. They're not subtle.
Yes, yes, but it is a broken clock.
Yeah, it's a broken clock
not working. And life and death don't have a natural order anymore because they're controlled by these quartz crystals. So the game kind of is built around this idea of stasis, and the plot reflects that because you're at the frozen moment where nothing is happening, learning to contextualize. All the plot is almost more to do with you as player learning what's happened than anything else. It's much more about your developing understanding of the world than it is about any change that is happening for any of the characters.
Yeah, which the ending, like, that's the point of the ending, probably. You know, but I mean, it's literally like there's so much stasis in the world that, like, by the time you actually reach an event where the status quo does change, it literally resets.
Possibly. I mean, we'll come to the ending, I think.
Sorry.
Yes, I mean, it's not really a game where you perform a role as these characters, right? You're not acting through them. It's more of like this world is performing for you, as like RJ's saying. It's more investigative like that.
Which I guess also, like, it's a very cinematic game. Like, the bits of the game that really work are the most cinematic, I think. It presents cinematic language very well. Those were always the bits of the game that I looked forward to. Like, okay, I'm stuck in this miserable dungeon, and it's going to last for hours, but at the end of it, a cinematic is going to happen, and that's going to be really good. And almost all of them were.
And it's not even that, like, the game itself starts at the end. All these cinematics, too, they happen, at the end of all these exchanges. So you have to... They even in the cinematics, they want you to piece together the interactions and the exchanges.
It's so PS1 in that all of the cutscenes happen at exactly the same point always. I'm not sure if that, like, it's just, it has such, like, an old school philosophy about where to put cutscenes. It's like there's never a surprise about when you see a cutscene.
Yeah, it's always very regimented.
You see cutscenes here,
one
and here.
cutscene that isn't in the start sequence or the end sequence of a chapter, which is when, and even then it kind of is, but they let you move around first, which is when Leanne has got wind of some secret about her past and goes off on her own to chase it, and you get to the bridge that's outside the town, and there's a cutscene on the world map. That's the only time, I think, that a cutscene isn't...
I think there's also, in the later chapter with Zephyr, there's the same one, where Zephyr goes off on his own.
No, that's before that chapter, but yeah, that happens too. When you go to meet the Cardinal on the bridge, there's a short cutscene.
But that's him meeting the Cardinal on the bridge.
Well, yeah,
that is
also the goal of this chapter. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's the boss fight.
I forgot that's a very short chapter.
It's such a short chapter. It's the best thing ever.
It's just,
that middle arc of extremely short chapters was actually really interesting, and I wish they experimented with their setup like that instead of just once.
Yeah, I mean, like this game is JRPG homeopathy. It's take a really good game and then dilute it 1 part in 3 and hope that it gets better.
I mean, we're going to need to talk about just the combat. Someone has to do it now.
Actually,
Austin, you like it?
Hold on, I gotta say one more thing about the chapter structure real quick, which is that and since it kind of goes off the side quest structure, playing through Xenoblade Chronicles, I'm already on chapter 3. I know that there are 11 chapters of the game. I am 3 hours into Xenoblade Chronicles, and I know that this game is 50 hours. Resonance of Fate has the exact same problem. Stop convincing me that I'm making great progress through a game because I'm blowing through early chapters really fast and then making the later chapters like 3 times as long. That's fucking infuriating, and it doesn't help me. It doesn't help me schedule my play sessions very well either.
Yeah, Resonance of Fate is actually the opposite of that, because the early chapters tend to be really long, while you learn the nightmare of a system and do millions and millions of side quests, and the side quests in each chapter get shorter and shorter and smaller and smaller.
The longest chapters are in the dead middle of Resonance of Fate, and they're incredibly long.
That's actually true. Yeah, no, you're completely right. The ending chapters are very long.
Like chapter 8, I think it was, I spent 10 or 12 hours in.
Alone, yeah.
In a 60-some hour playthrough, which was just nonsense.
But it's true. Well, I was just gonna say it's true. These devices as chapters don't really mean anything. It's just they're not even in Resonance of Fate. They're not even paced well enough to sequence off any story. Rather, it's just like it's more like an episode than a chapter.
Yeah, it feels like they played 358. It feels like they played 358 358 and a half days. That's the actual official title. And it feels like they played 358 and a half days. And they said, man, this structure where these characters go to work and then go home, and then they have this nice little ice cream cutscene, like that works pretty well as a structure. And then they were like, okay, but what if there were only 13 days, and the 13 days actually took like 7 days each?
I think it's my feeling was, it's very like some anime. Each chapter, and LeeRoy said, they're more like episodes. That's what it felt like to me. That these were the episodes of an anime.
True.
And one of those kind of anime where the plot happens in the background, the overarching plot, and each episode has its discrete plot.
Yeah, it's like Evangelion like that, where there is the kind of... It serves you up the content, although Evangelion's way better at this, and the more expected mundane aspects of the genre it's going at. But like, there's something undermining all of that. There's in the background, there's things that go directly against those taken for granted actions that you're used to doing.
Yeah. The one it reminded me of is Hellgirl or Jigoku Shoujo, from I want to say 2007-8, the original series ran, which is very episodic, and every episode has the same basic plot, and then in a handful of the episodes, there's something else going on that moves the general plot forwards. And the opening of Resonance of Fate felt very like that to me, where, of the first 8 chapters, I think 3 maybe were relevant to what happens at the end of the game.
That's
and the other
that's like another beef I want to say. Like, we just made fun of the side quests, but also it's also an insult that the main quest in Resonance of Fate often has nothing to do with anything you're doing either. Like,
oh yeah, the whole chapter where Barbarella wants you to get wine from the cooler,
right,
does
real
nothing.
meat.
Does nothing.
Barbarella wants wine from a cooler, and then after you get wine from the cooler, the very next episode,
and that's a really hard chapter.
Leanne is sick because you got wine from a cooler, and an entire episode is going back to the same exact place to get medicine for Leanne.
Okay, to be fair though, that chapter actually has the beginning of the terrible anime romance between Zephyr and Leanne.
Yeah, it's true.
Because it actually instigates the whole thing. But that's
it.
I mean,
but
it's still useless.
Does it need to be a whole episode? Does it need to be an entire dungeon?
God, no, of course not.
Exactly.
But it's worth saying, it quite possibly would be a whole episode in an anime.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've watched anime that are like that.
RJ, I've watched anime. Put that on Twitter.
Not advisable to take literal anime arc progression and put it in your JRPG.
So, that was all kind of digression before we got to the combat.
Yeah.
I think. So,
okay, let's just ask, am I the only one who actually enjoyed the combat in this game? Am I just crazy?
Once I got 40 hours into the game, and I'd figured out how all the combat was supposed to work, and put all the pieces together, and got a decent stock of resources, I actually did start to feel that it was satisfying. It doesn't play to my strengths as a player. It required input patterns that I'm not good at. Managing tri-attacks and stuff. But, the times when it all clicked, I could see why you would like it, why you could like this. But I think it takes an unforgivably long time to learn.
I'll just be honest, and I found it really fiddly, and the kind of outs they give you to win encounters, it attracted the worst parts of me being really efficient and playing JRPGs mainly, and so I couldn't play the combat straight because of, we're going to describe why, but there's just a lot of things outside of your control that can easily be exploited by you or the enemy, and I found myself constantly exploiting those things.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of kind of niggling flaws, from the way you can clip into objects and it completely sabotages your entire carefully planned attack to be a millimeter off position, to the fact that there is a power in the game that can completely invalidate any single enemy just as a roll of the dice, to just how quickly you can die if you get ganged up on.
Mm-hmm.
All these little things detract from the overall effect. And I'm not sure they actually achieve what they were going for, whether or not they achieve something worth playing.
I would make a few caveats here, which is that, one, I actually have only played Resonance of Fate to completion once, but I had tried to play it to completion at least twice before, and had gotten probably... Well, the first time I got 12 hours. Not the first time. The time that I got the most time in was 12 hours deep. And then Before that, I'd probably gotten 5 and 5, something like that. So I probably had 20, 25 hours playing the game before I'd ever actually made my official, like, okay, I'm going to beat the fucking game this time. So I actually had a lot of experience with the combat by the time I was actually trying to play the game, to the point where when I actually started to play the game again, I was just like, okay, I already know like exactly how I'm going to do this. I'm going to get a hero action, and then I'm going to get a good triangle going, #triangles, and I'm going to get a good triangle going, and then that was, and then that's it. Like, so I know how to blow up the game. The other thing being that tri-attacks themselves do require an incredible precision of inputs, and incredible precision in planning as well, because of the increasing amount of crap that they put inside of the rings that you fight in. I'm just call them rings. I agree with all that. There was also the thing is that I am probably completely fine with tri-attacks because compared to the kind of fighting game combos that I practice on a literally daily basis, that's nothing. And I'm not trying to insult anyone by saying that.
No, that's entirely fair. Basically, no power on earth is ever going to get me to pick up a fighting game ever again because it is so pointless for me to try. I cannot do them at all.
You can't do the motions in a fighting game?
I can't do... I can do any individual motion, but I can't in context master any of the motions to the extent that I can be effective with them.
Right.
I can mash, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't mash a tri-attack in this game.
Yep.
I want to describe how I played the game without tri-attacks to like demonstrate how weirdly unauthored the combat is. But is this me? Am I gonna have to describe how the combat works now? Is that what's happening?
Maybe I should try
I'll
and
do
go
it.
over some of
Since I haven't talked for fucking
All right,
20 minutes. You guys have been talking and I haven't had a chance to talk. So I'll describe the combat. You have two types of damage. You have scratch damage, which does a lot but cannot kill anything or permanently wound them. And you have direct damage, which does shit all but can turn any scratch damage on something or their armor into direct damage and permanently wound them. Unless they pick up some stuff that you drop when you get over-scratched because this game is rude.
That's
also,
one way of putting it.
I'll go over the various effects of like... I'll go over like the charge bonuses in a second. Like you can do the rest of the basics.
Okay, so basically, you can move and you can shoot, but moving and shooting are slow, so you want to use hero actions whenever possible. Hero actions are you tell your character to move in a straight line, and then you can jump or not jump, and on the way, you move and you shoot your target, and if you shoot them all on the ground, they have a chance to get launched, and if they get launched, you can jump into the air and shoot them back down to smack down them, and using a hero action costs a bezel point. And once you run out of bezel points, which also refill your health if you get hit by too much damage, you go into critical mode and you can't do shit. You might as well restart the battle.
Mm-hmm.
I won, in the entire game, I won like 2 battles while in critical mode.
Yeah.
And
also,
both of those were really close to being finished.
And when you use a hero action, if you cross the barrier, if you cross the line between the other 2 characters, you get a resonance point. And you can use resonance points and a bezel point to initiate a tri-attack where your characters run between their 3 positions as many times as you have resonance points and shoot things a lot. That's the long and short of it.
Yeah.
There's a few...
Worth kind of stressing, this is... so we're not standing in lines JRPG territory anymore. This is a 3-dimensional
physical
combat
space.
arena with terrain. It's a bit like Valkyria Chronicles for how the kind of moving and shooting works.
It is.
And it felt a lot like Valkyria Chronicles to me to play. So there's an element of a tactical RPG in there. Positioning is actually really important. The angle you shoot from and so on.
And also there's cover that can be used to your advantage and can also be used by your enemies, but they will probably just run around it because their AI isn't really that good.
Some of them do run around it, definitely.
Actually, I don't know if that's good or not good AI, because they're sacrificing the cover, but they're getting you out of the cover too, so whatever. Anyway, Austin, you're up for charging.
A few other, well, the other things I wanted to mention about the very particulars of hero actions. You get bezel points for killing enemies and also for destroying their armor, which is a lot of how the later encounters are balanced. Because like you get basically about a new bezel point per chapter, as well as you get bezel shards. At the end of every boss encounter, and I think there's also a few like optional enemies in the game that can be defeated for additional bezel shards. I don't remember how many total there are, but I know that I did
There
a lot
are
of these.
enough. I can answer that for you. You start with 3 bezel gauge notches, and you can get up to 6. I think it's 14 in the first place.
14 sounds right.
And then on New Game Plus, you can get the rest of the maximum 20 you can have.
I think I had 10 by the end of the game, so that sounds about right. Yeah.
I had about that 10 or 12.
Also worth noting is that due to the way the world map works, you can just find a bunch of bezel shards on the world map.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
There's
Just hexing the world map is a whole other thing.
Yeah, it's the best part of the game. But anyway.
Actually, it's a really good part of the game. I'd completely agree.
So, I'll say the combat is asymmetrical, that's the word. When you're controlling, without doing your actions, when you're controlling one character, every other enemy gets to fill up their like active time bar too. They all get to fill up their attacks while that one person gets to act, which can be pretty frustrating, which is why everyone's advocating, use your hero action so you can get somewhere and do things. But actually, I won a lot of fights by having all 3 characters stand completely in place, because I'm trying to think of the word from Dark Souls, but whatever. Every single enemy and your own characters have like a hidden
Poise?
poise, a hidden poise meter that when it's broken, their action gauge will be cancelled. And so combined with items like grenades or even charging up your handgun, which has a chance to stun enemies, and grenades have a chance to knock up enemies, you can stand in place and cancel enemies' attacks successfully every single round with your characters. And I've won battles by standing in place and stunning enemies until they die.
Yeah, I basically did that through the middle of the game because it was the only viable strategy, because you didn't have enough bezels and you couldn't just spam your way through because it was easy early encounters.
And I've also won the handgun charge does a gauge break, which I never really figured out exactly what it does.
I've never figured out what gauge breaks does either.
What I think it does. Oh, you know what it does?
I'm pretty sure that once you do a gauge break, they won't be able to heal with your bezel shards, which drop when you get overscratched. For the listeners, they won't be able to heal past that point if you get them below it.
Oh,
okay.
right.
Wow.
Well, what it also
how
does
convenient.
is stuns the enemy. So if you have, even one person with
that's
a
the
handgun,
more pertinent.
you can continually chain stuns on an enemy with 2 handguns, and you can keep any enemy completely stunned the whole battle, and you can also win a battle like that. So they have this really like meticulous battle system for you to strategize and position these characters perfectly in these tri-attacks, but you can just throw that away and then kind of roll the dice and try to stun these enemies consecutively or hope for a full scratch, and you can win battles way far way above your level cap by just these weird loopholes they have in their random battle
There
system.
is at least one boss fight as well where the optimal strategy is just chain stun this guy.
Yeah,
which felt a little poorly thought through, but that whole encounter was a nightmare.
They also make some side quests incredibly hard, where it doesn't even feel like I can play the more fun, encouraged tri-attack playstyle. There's been times where I've had to move my character into another character to push them into cover so they won't die, which you can actually move characters by running into them on this this physical space. And so there's all kinds of just strange things I've had to do in order to win incredibly hard encounters, which I will say Resonance of Fate is maybe the hardest JRPG I've ever played to completion. And I would have enjoyed the tri-attack battle system, but I found myself leaning more on exploiting items and these random chances to just win.
In a sense, there's definitely a phase of the game where it feels very like Disgaea, where you're not really supposed to play it straight, because, in Disgaea, as Devon has pointed out, that's a very thematically resonant thing of you're the bad guys, you're the demons, you're evil, so yeah, of course you cheat. In this, it doesn't make so much sense.
No, it doesn't.
But there's a definite sense that some of the bosses are puzzle bosses. Like, there's one solution that will make them trivial, and if you don't do that, they're basically impossible. And yeah, I think I'd agree this is one of the hardest JRPGs I've ever seen. There are definitely encounters in it that I do not think I could win by any means, even at the end of the game.
I had a completely different experience than y'all, I gotta say. I'm not saying that you're playing it wrong or whatever. I don't know, I don't really know how to account for that, but I actually found out, to me, I had a completely opposite experience because I feel like every single boss fell victim to... Well, for one, I wanted to go... Well, actually, I didn't mention the charge bonuses. There was a thing that LeeRoy mentioned real quick that I wanted to address, which is that you can move, all of the enemies can move while only one of your characters can move at the same time. I think that's why tri-attacks exist, because tri-attacks will fuck up enemies. Tri-attacks just... They don't know what to do. You can be focusing on one enemy, and then, nothing will be able to hit you because you're flying through the goddamn air. And that's typically how that's the thing that I figured out over time was just, that's how the game is balanced. It's just...
It's balanced for you to mostly be acting at the, if you like, accelerated speed of hero actions and tri-attacks, because enemy stuff charges less fast per unit movement and per unit charge of shot during tri-attacks. They just get less charge.
You're also unable to finish a complete charge if you stand and shoot, unless your gun's incredibly upgraded, but I don't see any possible way of doing that. So hero actions are, obviously the way you're supposed to do combat, at least by their setups.
And tri-attacks specifically.
Of course.
And certain encounters, I would say, even were balanced around, okay, they want you to actually, take the risk on doing... There were certain encounters I found that specifically just, wanted you to go all out and, use almost all of your bezel shards, almost all of your hero actions, and then on the last one, do a tri-attack that just blows everything out of the water.
That was how I finished the final boss.
Yeah. It was really nice, actually, how simple the final bosses ended up being in comparison to a lot of stuff that you were fighting.
I hate you die in a fire. Shut up.
What?
Well, they are really straightforward. They're hard, but they're really straightforward.
They're just huge damage tanks. That's it. They just take a lot of...
And they're immune to full scratch, which is one of the fun additional side effects of charging up your scratch weapons, which is sometimes your guns will just turn every bit of green health on an enemy into blue, so you can kill them instantly.
That's one of the charge bonuses. Charge bonuses, there's full scratch, which applies to SMGs, and which SMGs are the scratch weapons, and then on handguns, which are the direct damage weapons, and grenades, which are also the... I didn't level up grenades at all, so I don't know what kind of bonuses you can get on grenades.
It's knock up. I used grenades, so
grenades were good.
But with handguns, I think you can actually get stuff that pierces armor, and you can not only get pierce armor on handguns as a charge bonus, but also instant kill, I think. If you level them up far enough, which, since I use double handguns and exponentially increased my damage output with all my guns, that ended up happening. What were the other things? Those were the most powerful ones. But basically,
the most useful for me, at least in my experience, because I didn't get that high level either, was the submachine gun has a stun bonus on its own that also affects bosses, and so I could often stun even the last boss with my charge attack, which really useful.
Nice.
Yeah, being able to stun bosses was central to a lot of strategy, and there were times where I reset a fight because I didn't get the stun I needed.
The other thing is there's there's the poise thing, which affects not just being able to break an enemy's charge, and it's an invisible value, which fuck that, god damn it. Game design. It's 2015. Stop putting invisible values in your game. Fuck you, because everybody's gonna find out about them anyway, because it's the goddamn internet. What was I going to say? So that also applies to if you do lots of hero actions, you'll eventually learn that enemies can be popped up into the air if you shoot at them on the ground for long enough, which is the exact one reason that you should not jump at every hero action, even though it's really, really useful. because you can knock them up in the air, and then you can jump into the air and then smack the enemies back down, which gives you minor damage bonuses as well as making the enemies drop rare items. It also makes them drop items that are rarer than what you usually get, which is how, if you really get invested in gun grinding, like to level up your guns and stuff like that, then that's what you do.
Also, if they have any bezels that they picked up, which is more useful for bosses, you can knock it out of them with a smackdown.
That's true as well. I got to points where like my tri-actions were like so hot that I was doing like literally 999 hit combos, which is the maximum on the combo counter, and then just kept shooting.
God,
but that's actually that's I have a vine of this. That's
I think
when
the best I ever managed was like 100.
This is when I got
I
convinced.
think I got up to 190.
The most resonance points I know I've collected was 6, so I don't remember how many hits I ended up doing.
Basically, it's just that. What was I going to say? I just remember basically hitting 999, and then just stacking and stacking and stacking, and thinking like, okay, I am really enjoying this because this is a broken mess. But like, but at the same time, like this obviously doesn't have as much insight into it as I thought. Like, I like the balance of like how hero actions and bezel shards and like enemy movement and all that balance against each other. I think when you figure it out, it works pretty well. But yeah, it does take a pretty absurd amount of time to actually get used to, and it also is not particularly well taught, and it is also vastly overextended. Vastly overextended past the point at which its balance can handle.
Besides all the critical nonsense, the major problem with the game is how these encounters do not feel authored to match up with the system they made, because the system is really great, and then there's just enemies that just shoot missiles that do all your health, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically like they just put in enemies that say, okay, you're gonna get fucked on the first turn of this, so you need to pick the perfect first action, which often ends up being run at them, pray, and hope you can launch them in the air, because that's literally the only thing that will prevent them from attacking, and then land an awesome try attack that will make them miss all of their shit. A lot of the bosses work that way, and I enjoyed it, but it was terrible. Like, yeah, no, that's all I have to say.
I just have a little... I think that the system and a lot of this game just needs, like... I don't know. I think it was rushed out of development a bit, because I feel like a lot of this could just have some, like, minor tweaks, and it wouldn't be so goddamn rough. Like the fact that every bezel point will only ever restore 1,000 hit points, so if one of your characters with 5,000 or something goes down, you lose 5 bezel points right out of the bat. And since that can just happen on some of the final bosses, you're just down 5 bezel points for no reason. Like, if I had to implement one thing, it would just be like, hey, maybe there's another collectible you can do a side quest for that makes every bezel heal more, so you don't lose so many goddamn bezel points.
That would be lovely. Or just a way of recovering bezels when you're...
Without killing enemies.
Honestly, I would just remove the entire condition critical from the game.
Condition critical is useless. It's honestly, it feels like they're mocking me because of all the animations change into these really unnatural, unfitting.
It's a total joke, and it's just like Tri-Ace asking, "Oh, what? You haven't played our other shitty broken games?" I'm like, "No, I haven't played your other shitty fucking broken games, Tri-Ace. You suck." I'm sorry. Somebody needs to tell these people that they're incompetent jackasses. And it has to be me, because I actually liked one of the games they made.
Speaking as somebody who's got to play Star Ocean 4 at some point in the next year...
No, you don't.
I want to be on that delegation.
No, you don't.
If I liked Wild Arms, I'll probably like Star Ocean. I mean, it just feels like natural at that point.
LeeRoy, don't make me ban you. I'll ban you.
Actually, now that you mentioned Wild Arms, I just want to bring this up real quick, although maybe we were going to address it at the end of the episode. I missed 2 episodes because Wild Arms was a piece of fucking garbage, and and I didn't play more than an hour of it, and then I got mono, so I missed Kingdom Hearts. I actually slept through Kingdom Hearts, and then I found out I had mono, so that kind of explains me sleeping through it. So those are my excuses. Sorry about that.
Good grief.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even make out with anyone to get mono. I got mono, and I didn't get mono for any reason. Yeah, I didn't even get mono for any reason. It's the worst. Okay.
Anyway, it is worth noting that, there are some distinct similarities between this game and Wild Arms. in terms of being padded to heck, visually striking at random moments, and having basically the same cast.
Well, at least guns are actually central to Resonance of Fate and not just like magic.
Yeah.
Well, you say guns are central to Resonance of Fate, but we got through the entire description of the combat without even mentioning what the combat is trying to evoke.
They don't behave like guns, but they are guns.
The guns are trying to evoke the Matrix. That's what they're trying to evoke.
Yeah, but we got through the entire combat discussion without saying that. And I think that's telling.
Well,
like that's
except
fundamentally
in the cinematics, all the time the guns are treated as guns, and the guns constantly do lethal in a single shot, which is just kind of a weird contrast to the
It's
abstract.
the Devil May Cry problem.
It is the John Woo problem.
It's also the video game problem.
Yeah, well, but I mean, the specific kind of genealogy of this style is like, most immediately it's like Equilibrium and the Matrix, it's bullet time stuff that was mid-90s. But standing right behind that in cinema history is John Woo's Hong Kong films. And okay, there's less acrobatics in those, but the ratio of bullets to effect is the same. And the slow-mo is the same, the use of slow-mo, and the way that the whole experience focuses on the gunplay is the same. It's just that it doesn't work in this because there isn't... The camera cannot, when you're actually in the action, deliver the kind of planning and shot structure that you find in those Hong Kong action films.
Yeah, the focus has to be on the characters, not the bullets, so yeah.
Yeah, and also, it's a thing where, like, the camera has a rule where it will always, when you're in a hero action, look past your character to the target.
Yeah.
Which often means you can't actually switch to the next target you want, because that target will just be completely off screen.
That's such an easy fix, though, all of it. Yeah, there could just be a pause for you to switch targets in mid-hero action, but no, it has to be
or
full.
you could set a queue or just a menu on screen, like, what do you want to target next? Get down the menu as quickly as you can. It could still be real time, and it isn't.
Picking new targets in hero action... New targets in hero action is probably the most frustrating aspect of Resonance of Fate combat, because
it's pretty bad.
You hit left, and you're not going to go to the leftmost enemy. You're just going to go to some enemy, and it honestly makes the hierarchy doesn't make any sense. I've never.
This could have been really, really easily fixed with like some kind of like Final Fantasy VIII style like drop-down menu that just lists the enemies, and then at the very least, if you were scrambling, you could at least scramble through all of them really quickly to find the one that you're looking for.
That's
also if charge bonuses carried between different enemies, which would
why
solve the whole problem.
Like Jesus, it's just aiming, right? I don't know.
It's like, oh my god, I have to re-aim my gun that has like 500 billion goddamn bullets in the cartridge, because I've got literally 2 drum magazines attached to it.
How have we not talked about the gun modding?
I don't want to talk about the gun modding.
The gun modding is
awesome.
So it's the funniest thing about the game.
It's so bad, but it's so good.
The gun modding is the power glove.
I did end up with a submachine gun that had 4 main barrels, 2 of which had barrels pointing vertically downwards off them, and 6 sights, 2 of which had sub-sights attached to them that were pointing straight at the barrel of the gun.
Yeah,
the gun modding is ridiculous.
Actually, I've seen like the like pro tips, like best builds for the guns, and actually all of them are just it's the gun in the lower left corner. Which, by the way, the game does not explain to you how to move the gun on the screen, which is terrible.
Thanks to Devin, because I would have never figured it out.
I don't even remember how you do it, but like
the right stick.
The best thing you do is that the best thing that you can do is to take the gun. Put it in the lower right corner of the screen, and then just get attachment sights, and then just make it sights on sights on sights, because it doesn't matter if you have any increased accuracy or if you have like extra bullets in your cartridge, because getting charge bonuses is like the best thing that you can possibly do.
It's worth noting
that's exactly what sights do.
It's worth noting too that sights don't improve accuracy. Just to clarify this for listeners,
they improve zoom speed. They improve charge speed.
They improve just the initial charge speed, the first one, and that's it. It's so weird. It's the barrels that then do all the other charges after.
Wait, that's
Yeah, it's
what?
the charge.
Yeah,
the
really.
charge acceleration is what you want to stack hard.
Oh, then it must have been barrels.
Yeah,
No,
it's
I think it
barrels
actually.
on
I think it
barrels on
actually
barrels.
was barrels. It was barrels on barrels on barrels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
More barrels than you have bullets in the cartridge, by the way. Like,
Oh god, yeah. Like both affect it because the sight set where you start from, and then the barrel set how much faster each charge is than the previous one.
Yeah, and so the first one influenced the second one. They're both important.
oh,
It's a weird dynamic.
Oh, I found the game FAQs thread. It's my custom setups of every weapon.
I don't want to see.
For those of you,
I'm gonna put this link in the description.
yeah, for those of
so
you
people
listening
can
at
see it,
home,
but-
I honestly
Google
hate
Resonance
this.
of Fate gun customization on the image search and spend a
Laugh.
wondrous minute just paging through the results.
Can
Yeah,
we argue about which gun is the best waifu?
Jesus
PDX, of
Christ,
course.
Austin, I nearly killed my microphone.
Oh, Jesus.
I'm sorry, I just got a Crunchyroll account again, and I've been watching anime.
Get in the trash can.
I'm already there, buddy.
Right. Oh, man. Can I say
Oh
one more
my
thing on the
God.
combat before we move on to story?
Sure, go ahead.
So, kind of bringing it back to this idea of this is a westernized JRPG in some ways. One of the big complaints that was, and my experience of this is mostly the escapist forums in about 2008. But
Oh, what a place.
what a
Yeah, I
place.
love that place.
One of the biggest complaints that you saw, and there was a new thread about it every damn week on there, about JRPGs, was abstracted JRPG combat where characters stand in lines opposite each other and take turns. Yeah? This is a favourite kind of Western fuckboy
Punching
gamer complaint about JRPGs. And something that you see again and again through this period is games that try to give a less abstract time and a less abstract space. So Eternal Sonata is one. Obviously Valkyria Chronicles is another, but Blue Dragon has a bit of it. Last Remnant has quite a lot of it. These games do this.
FF13 tries.
All of the Tales games.
Well, Telltale Games already did that, and it's telling
That's
that
true.
the most successful game in this period for doing this is a Tales game, because they knew what they were doing. But
And Kingdom Hearts. I was about to say that all of them could be Kingdom Hearts and this problem would be solved, but yeah.
if only. No, wait, I hated the combat in Kingdom Hearts 1. No, but
Get out.
the the point is, clearly what they've tried to do is move space and time in combat in this game in a literal direction, but it's really not any more literal at all. It's still very abstract
It
because
feels even more abstract because you're doing these literal actions that amount to completely unliteral, nonsensical things. Like with turn-based combat, the abstraction is all abstract, so you're allowed to evoke, all of it, right? But in these games where the abstracts are placed for like quasi-literal, there's not as much I can author into the combat anymore. There's not as much space because I know where the characters are going, I know what they're doing, and I know they're doing 999 hits on the boss, and it starts matching up less to me.
yeah, it's the abstraction uncanny valley is what it is.
Yeah, pretty much.
But like the thing that's really frustrating about the combat is that you can never predict when something is going to be abstract and when it's going to be literal. You can never predict when I'm going to clip on that wall because I'm a physical object in a physical space versus when I'm going to go past that wall fine because I am an abstracted game object in an abstracted game space.
That does not have a hitbox that connects with that thing's hurtbox, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And that unpredictability, particularly in terms of when something is blocking your line of sight when you're jumping. Like the reticule will go blocked line of sight, like faded out reticule so you can't see this target, and then you'll press fire and your character will be 30 feet higher in the air to give it line of sight to the target.
I frankly lost encounters because I ran into something and I didn't realize I would hit it,
Yeah.
Yep.
The,
I've said before, like that's one of the one things that's like you could just have a bad turn and realize that there's no hope.
The tank
and
enemies,
that's like-
the tank enemies in the final dungeon, I clipped off freaking aerials on those things that ended my hero actions.
Yeah,
Like,
having
oh,
enemies
man.
that were so tall that you couldn't jump over them was infuriating.
Especially when their AI is get close to person, so they're always in your fucking face. It's
So
the
they're
worst.
always running at you.
I clipped off
Oh,
the bad
also-
breath of an enemy once, I'm sure.
And the radius of them is their parts, not the enemy. So they extend even larger than their model, and so you kind of just have to guess. Like, you can kind of see, but also you're gonna mess up because it's dumb.
Parts are another thing that seems like it's really literal, because the part will be a sheet of armor that covers a particular angle of the enemy, but it covers the entirety of that angle. So it's like the actual thing that shows a hit animation, like a blue flash when you hit it, will be one tiny plate on the enemy's chest, but it blocks
But
all
it's really
shots.
like this arc of a dome.
Yeah.
They're magnets.
How do they
I
work?
put all my bad bullet luck into this one plate, and I'm gonna stick it on my chest. Now everyone's shooting me in the chest. Yeah, that's tactics.
It's funny you mention magnets, because we're about to move on to talk about the plot, and that brings us to the subject of miracles.
Wait.
I was about to say, there we go.
Jesus Christ!
I didn't.
Yes!
I was gonna try for it. You did it so much better.
I have been...
I mean, I already brought up Gun-kata waifus, so like, yeah.
We're already an hour in, but I think I do actually want RJ to talk about the map because I think RJ.
So world
Focus,
map
man.
for a bit then, because...
You want to do the map, please. I want to hear about it.
So the world map in this, for those of you who've not played the game, the setting is a tower, and it is called the Tower of Basel, which is a...
Oh
I
my
think
god,
an
it's the
entire
Tower of Babel, isn't it?
No, is that a mistranslation?
Sorry?
Is that a mistranslation?
No, it's probably on purpose, but they're like, it's Tower of Babel, Tower of Basel, and I never noticed it until just... Okay, whatever.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing that makes this accidentally really clever. Basel is a town in Switzerland, which is a country famous for its clocks.
Oh my God!
Wow.
That is
It's
twice as bad.
probably a
Somebody-
pun in
That's
Japanese.
It is entirely possible that we have a German or Swiss listener who will correct me on my geography on that, but there's a town called Basel somewhere in that part of the world, alright? And it's just Triace enough that might be the idea.
Yeah, that's probably
Tower
it.
of Babel and the clock.
I think this all begs the
Goddamn
question,
time.
though: are the people at Triace smart enough to write that joke?
I think they'll try hard enough, right?
Try hard.
I think they are tryhards. Yeah.
Anyway.
Honestly, they won't
Yeah.
even think it's a joke. They'll think it's like actually like really symbolic and cool. That's true.
Yeah, it's that's their thing. They're like they got Ken Levine over there writing their jokes.
God.
Welcome
Can I
to
talk
the
about the cutting
welcome to
hexagons?
the
Because we spent half an hour on the triangles, and the hexagons are the better bit of this game.
triangles.
The hexagons. A hexagon
That's
is six
just two
triangles. It's
triangles,
therefore
dude.
superior.
It's not 6 triangles. It's 2 triangles.
Can be 6 triangles.
All right, fine. All right, yeah.
Why
Swiss,
are we arguing about geometry? For God's sake!
So,
Triangles are the true waifu.
set. So the setting is this tower.
I'm
and
not
the
even
tower
sorry.
is shut up. The tower is a big clockwork machine for doing something we know not what, which we'll come to. But the way that actually exploring the world map works is before you can go anywhere, you have to activate the terrain you want to travel across. The idea is that the bits you want to travel across are powered down, and you have to power them back on, which is this kind of hexagon Tetris game. You collect hexes to activate the hex sections of the map and like power up different areas, and it's a puzzle for, can I get all of this activated efficiently? What hexes do I need? There are terminals scattered around the map which give special effects to territory that's connected to them if you connect enough territory with special coloured hexes. Most actual locations on the world map have to be unlocked with a particular coloured hex, and you have to place your own save points on the world map, which this game is unforgivable in how few save points it gives you. but I do actually think it's quite interesting the way that save points work later on, because a save point also allows you to warp home. So you only get the classic JRPG thing of being able to shortcut the return from a location if you put in the hours to activate all the hexes and place save stations and power them up properly. And you can only, like, escaping from a dungeon, once you've got to the end of a dungeon, you either have to walk back through it or you have to use an item called an escape hex. So the first thing to note with the map is there's a lot of it is there to make you think about the return journey. So we're centering you on a home base location rather than having a classic JRPG formula where you go on a quest. This is, you always come back home and you always have to think about the journey home. And through the game, you benefit if you plan for and you work towards making your journey home more efficient. Like towards the end of the game, I had a warp home from every level, and that sped things up so much because I just didn't have to wade through the extra random encounters. There are random encounters on the world map. The encounter rate isn't terribly high, and the other thing with the world map, it's kind of at a world map scale rather than being like in an FF7 world map way where the world map is kind of also you're walking around in the world. In this, you don't appear as like a mini Vacheron or a mini Zephyr on the world map. You're just a cursor, and exploring it is like moving the cursor around when you're on the menu map screen in other games, which I found really disorienting a lot of the time. It felt harder to control, even though there was no kind of mechanical reason for that. It just felt odd. But what that allows it to do is to be much further zoomed out, so you can actually see the world map, and the way it's framed, where you can see the giant gears of this mechanism turning, which for me was one of the most beautiful bits of visual design I've ever seen in a video game. I love how the world map looks in this, particularly once you get down to lower levels and the tower starts to broaden out, and you can see down to the ground below and to the ocean underneath as well.
We never mentioned that Resonance of Fate is actually a gorgeous game. It's just
Resonance of Fate is really a beautiful, beautiful game. Yeah,
their environments are just really controlled, and so they didn't make a lot. So those, the places they made really stick out and are really carefully made. But you're going to be revisiting them a lot.
I remember tweeting this back when I was playing the game, is that this game has like the best images of urban dystopia in a JRPG since Final Fantasy VII, period. Like, the framings of them, the coloring.
Also, it's post-apocalyptic.
Yeah,
which is never super touched on, which is...
I think they don't care, really. I think that's the thing.
It's hard for me to say it's really post-apocalyptic, but...
It's like
post our civilization.
It's like
it's definitely post our civilization.
It's far, far in the future.
The thing is that the apocalypse that the game is concerned with is the breaking of the machine, which, like, the key point for the breaking of the machine has happened and is in the past, but bits of the machine still function, and it's kind of grinding to a halt, and it's in the process of grinding to a halt.
Yeah.
Like playing the game. Oh!
Fair.
And he's the one who likes it.
I know.
The world map, it's RJ saying it's like a management thing, so it's actually really tranquil, and it's one of the only ties Resonance of Fate has to really older kind of RPGs where you're spending a lot of time mapping out where you're going to go and how you're going to do it, and physically mapping it out too, because through their specific, because Resonance of Fate has a lot of specific things for the mechanics, and this is another really specific mechanic that lets you, map out the whole world. And the only weird part about it is these hexes actually literally repair Basel, but for some reason, only the three main characters ever repair Basel at all.
That was the thing I was going to say, is like you're one band of literal mercenaries that is just tasked with like, hey, can we like move between these parts of the world now? Like, it's just, yeah.
Like there are actual quests of like, hey, I need to get down to that place, and you're the only people who like handle this shit. Can you handle letting me go to my job?
Yeah.
How did that happen? How did you get a job there? No one's moving.
on the point
again,
about
the David Byrne thing comes up. How did I get here? Sorry.
On the point about kind of different levels of abstraction and not really knowing what level of abstraction it wants to run at, it's worth pointing out that by the world building, if you take the world building seriously, at the start of the game, literally no one can leave any town, and all the nobles can't leave their houses, and none of the nobles' houses have power. And this is an endemic problem until you have some reason to go to a place and you switch it on.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's really central, oddly.
Which kind of begs the question: how the fuck did that one guy get down into the mines? Unless he was just born there. Except he was a military general, and fuck whoever writes the Tri-Ace games.
There was definitely some lapsed communication among different bits of the development of this game.
I think there was lapsed communication between the writer's brain and his hand.
Oh my god, I can't go.
Oh my lord.
Oh yeah, so I didn't mention it, but for once I didn't finish the game. I'm the only one among us who hasn't finished the game. That's because I got to chapter 7 and I was like, wow, this is a slog. I'm not doing this. And then I stopped and I decided to play Final Fantasy XIV a bunch instead.
I'm not gonna spite you that at all. I'm really not. Like, I mean, I've told people, like, I love this game, but it's not, I mean,
I can't.
I guess this game is my Dark Souls in a way, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm
so
sorry.
Dark Souls,
I'm sorry that I did that. I'm sorry that I just said that, but like, it's just in terms of being like my, like this whole thing is. This game is like my bullshit that I love, and like I want other people to like it, and it's just, I'm gonna keep fucking telling you to like it until you like it, whether you like it or not. Yeah.
Well, it's good you said it, so I don't have to.
Yeah.
I can't recommend this game to. I don't know who would like it. Honestly, it's.
I would recommend it to someone who wants to believe that there are good JRPGs except the Tales games on the PS3.
Right. If you really
thing.
want to do the deep dive, you really want to like try to play a game that doesn't want you to play it, you can go ahead. You'll be able to enjoy it. But you have to force yourself, and you have to want it because the game doesn't.
I will say that if
care.
you recently played Dark Souls, that you'll find this to be a refreshing jog.
Here's who I would recommend the game to. I would recommend the game as punishment for anybody saying JRPGs are formulaic.
Yeah, that's...
Oh, absolutely.
Because this is so far off anything that gets perceived as the JRPG formula. Although, LeeRoy, didn't you say you found on like Gaff somewhere a thread where somebody was complaining about the game?
Yeah, they were talking about the story, which doesn't make sense either. I don't even...
Yeah, no, the story's
stupid. That.
This is honestly, I think this has been one of my long-standing theories is that people don't hate like how formulaic JRPG combat is. They hate like everything that's happening around it that makes the combat feel a lot worse, because in a good JRPG that has like even like the strictest and most monotonous like turn-based combat, like a Dragon Quest game, like that turn-based combat and like its weird abstractions are serving a very explicit purpose. So like when those games are done well, like, it adds up to being like a kind of stable enough object to where like it doesn't end up being a matter of concern even remotely. And just as the early 2000s became the mid 2000s, the quality of writing in JRPGs severely declined for the most part, and then people started noticing. And it was just like, what the fuck are we doing?
I will comment on the fact that very strict turn-based systems are not inherently bad, and that Pokemon exists and was continued to exist after the fucking first generation. The second, and the third.
Pokemon just gets like tossed away. It's not even treated as a JRPG when it's still like Dragon Quest. It's one of the few games still like Dragon Quest.
Pokemon is the best counterexample to the JRPG formula as a problem.
Yeah.
Even though I hate Pokemon and will never
They're
play
on
it.
like Gen 7 now, and they're all like the same formula, even if they look prettier while doing it.
Honestly, Pokemon gets thrown out as JRPGs because JRPG people don't tend to like Pokemon that much for a lot of reasons, and also, but more importantly, Pokemon people, like regular people, play Pokemon and they don't want to admit that that's a JRPG.
Yeah, which is why a lot of stuff like JRPGs are terrible, except for like once every 3 years. A game I like came out, so
it's just
Persona 4. Fuck you.
It's like I played. It's like, oh yeah, there was Persona 4, and then like that game that came out that played all like the MMOs that I play all the time. That are Just,
honestly, when RJ was talking about all the games that came out in this era, I was like, wow, I've never played any of these games. Like the most modern RPG I've played is Final Fantasy VII, so I'm like, and Persona.
The oldest or the most modern?
Most modern is Final Fantasy VII.
Really?
I've played.
Okay.
I have old. I've played mostly old stuff because I guess that's just where my interests are.
So you haven't played anything past like 1998?
Not really, no.
Okay, all right, fine. I'm surprised to hear that. I didn't know that.
It is kind of, it's just weird for me.
And part of the reason that this is the period that I'm interested in is that this was like my slacker student days was when these games were coming out.
Yep.
And so I had a lot of time to play them. Don't tell my professors, some of whom I now work with, that I was playing video games and a lot of Guitar Hero instead of doing the reading. But,
well, I'll tattle on you for playing Guitar Hero, but JRPGs are good with me.
So, I mean, does that cover us kind of mechanically?
Yeah, we're ready to talk about the story. I just don't know how to start it.
Yeah, honestly, the hex thing is like literally you have it's a resource thing. Some of the hexes are colored, and like the colored hexes are an even more special resource, and you're more likely to find good stuff under the colored hexes. You can like uncover the entire world map, which has some kind of reward to it, and it will guarantee that you find all of the bezel shards for one. But actually, the whole game does not actually cover the entire world map. All of the side quests and the main quests don't actually cover the world map, so you have to like make that its own objective.
There's also another dungeon in New Game Plus, I think Arthur was going to say.
Yes, you can't. There's 4 hexes you can't clear on a first playthrough because
they're right outside the first town.
Yes, basically down a particularly awkward side passage.
I got down there, I couldn't open it up, and I was sad.
I got down there. I spent like the first half of the game. That was my objective, was to get to the end of that path because there was clearly something there. And I got to the end of the path. I was like, oh.
Clearly, somebody played a Dragon Quest game and it's just like, yeah, that thing where we fucking tease them with the shit that's hidden behind the door, and then they get to it later, and it's like severely outclassed by the shit they already have. That shit is awesome. You know. Like,
well, Tales of Zestiria did that with the final dungeon and area of the game. It's like, oh, why is there this door in the first place we go to? Then you have to come back, and it's cool. And it's the final boss. And
yeah, but it works in Tales of Zestiria because it plays into all kinds of complicated story theory stuff. But
welcome to Intermission.
Where do we start? Do we want to start like chronologically, or do we want to start with?
I'm going to start with my opinion about what the story should have been, and I'm going to say that I wish the story had.
I really liked the story, but okay, keep going.
I just wish that the story had... Well, okay, there's nothing actually really wrong with the story, aside from the fact that the game's really goddamn sexist.
Yeah.
There's nothing really wrong with it, except for the fact that the story's really goddamn sexist, and, like, nothing really happens in it, except they don't really commit to the whole nothing actually happens thing. If they had gone full Seinfeld, it'd be perfect.
It kind of... And then, honestly, nothing happens in it, though. Nothing happens.
Nothing really happens, but then they try and convince you that something's going to happen.
Nah, and then they end the game. Nothing happens, in my opinion. Nothing happens, really.
I think the ending...
Okay, it's not true.
Like the whole point.
It's not true that nothing happens, but nothing happens that relates to anything you did in the video game.
It's very like... And again, I'm going to use the anime comparison, but it's very like what sometimes gets called the slice of life anime. Azumanga Daioh stuff.
Yeah, slice of life.
Yeah, no, it's totally slice of life.
But with 3 angsty, really angsty characters.
3 angsty mercenaries.
Vacheron isn't that angsty.
Sure, kind of.
He's old and...
I mean, he has survivor's guilt too. It doesn't come up very often.
Vash's angst kind of gets dealt with in the early chapters, like the first chapter or the second chapter. You get sent to place that flower.
Well, you get the feeling Vacheron has already dealt with it, and so he's just watching over Vash.
He's just dad.
Zephyr's already dealt with it. I don't know about Vash. Oh my gosh, I got the names confused.
I'm still
Zephyr is the scowling sad boy.
But yeah, you get the feeling Vacheron's already dealt with it, right? He's come to terms with it. And he's trying to see Zephyr through whatever he's trying to see if he can accept what he's done. I shouldn't start from the beginning. I was thinking about starting, with the Cardinals and the prelate. That stuff honestly doesn't matter. We don't need a whole history of Basil, and so we could start with Leanne's jumping off the clock tower. which is
So, aside from the first content warning, this would now be a good time to remind people of that
right,
content
Yes.
warning.
right. Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna.
We'll be discussing suicide attempts in this episode of Resonance of Fate discussion, so if that's not your thing, feel free to turn off the episode now. I'll put a timestamp on the YouTube and try and also put a timestamp on the description so you can skip past it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, on the one hand, the actual game, when you press Start New Game, the first cutscene you get is
that.
It's a girl jumping off something high, which is an anime trope. But it's worth mentioning that before that, like the splash screens for the game, there are 2 splash screens that are 2 3-minute movies that are actually critical to understanding the plot.
Yep.
Yeah.
Neither of
Like,
which
they're
are
two
actually
of the most
like...
important scenes in the game happen before you press New Game.
And you actually have to wait for one of them to play as an attract mode cutscene.
Yeah.
It's horrible. Like,
And it leads you to a second different title screen.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
Is much better,
It's
in my
very
opinion.
well, but it's a very menacing picture of Zenith, the machine at the heart of Basel, which I think would be more appropriate to show up like if you game over it and went to the title screen. But they didn't do anything like that.
No, they're not. But yes, the game. So the game starts with this anime trope suicide scene, and it starts as it means to go on as far as the treatment of Leanne's character goes, fundamentally. But what happens then is Zephyr happens to be walking past and jumps off to try to catch her and catches her, and the rope breaks, and then they fall down the tower. Like, it's made clear later on that they're right at the top levels of this tower. And they
which
jump
begs the
off.
question, how did Zephyr get all the way up there? And why is he up there by himself? Sorry.
Well, he sometimes has reason to go up there. I don't think that's too far out of the way.
Yeah, but he's not with Vacheron.
He's not with Vacheron. That's interesting.
And this fuckboy doesn't have his own life.
It's
Like,
true.
it's just, all right, sorry, go ahead.
Only
yes.
possible explanation: he just got in a fight with Vashron, and so he left.
That would happen.
Possibly.
That could
Or
totally.
Vacheron got called away
Yeah,
to
solo
like a
mission.
private meeting.
Yeah.
No, like he went up there with Vacheron, but then Vacheron got called into a meeting and told him to kill some time.
Yeah, that could happen too.
Yeah.
And then Zephyr heard kill. Yeah, that sounds. Yeah.
No, because what he then does is save
A joke
someone.
is really funny if you've actually played the game. Sorry.
Zephyr gets demonized a little bit, but not really.
But so Zephyr saves Leanne. They end up they're falling together off this tower, and they fall out of the top tier of privileged people, and they get to kind of the level that Zephyr and Vash live at. And the game never
it cuts
explains how they land safely.
Yeah.
Nope.
It does hint that it's one of the miracles that's in the game. Kind of. But you never... Every other time the game says a miracle happened and someone escaped death, you don't see the symbol. Like, every other time there's a miracle, you see a symbol and the game shows you a cutscene with that symbol in it.
Actually,
And it never shows you the cutscene for that.
for that one. I was just thinking they don't show you that symbol, the so-called sacred mark, until the very end of the game, so you don't even know what it looks like. They keep it away from you.
They show it.
Just
they show
the
it
one
you first.
cutscene. Just the one cutscene with Vashron and that dragon girl.
No, because
think
they
it's the only
also
thing.
show it in the Zephyr cutscene that explains how Vash and Zephyr met.
In the opening.
Not the opening, the one
Oh.
explaining what happened at the opening.
I don't remember it, but I know they talk
Yeah,
about
it's
it.
in
But
there.
I don't remember seeing the mark. But okay, sure.
But the idea of miracles, and specifically the miracle of people cheating death, is central to what the game is about. So I can do a potted Hume's theory of miracles lecture now, or we can talk about other bits of the plot first. I don't know.
That's. I kind of disagree because the thing is, but I have to talk about all the story to disagree there. Miracles are irrelevant because at least, especially Sullivan, stops believing in miracles immediately. They have ontological proof of God being this machine Zenith that they've worshipped forever, and so
The machine that is the broken down clock is Zenith, which is the god machine, by the way.
yeah,
Yes.
the God in the machine, and so the Sullivan. I'm going to assume that it's some kind of just age-old thing where one person gets to know the secrets of Zenith. They get to be the high priest cardinal, and they get to learn what actually Zenith is. And Sullivan, this late generation, learns of what Zenith is, and he chooses to divulge the information into the acting president, which is Rowan. He's the highest cardinal right now. Since there is no prelate, they have not had a new prelate, which is their actual supposed to be the real leader of the cardinals. And so these two
And the prelate's his dead wife, right?
Yeah, it's just, they never say their actual relationship, but yeah, you assume it's his dead wife.
Well, he has a ring, so there's clearly some kind of symbolism of marriage.
Thank you.
At least
engagement.
fiancé.
Yeah, there is engagement. But so these two...
Actually, it could be a lot worse. It could be a promise ring.
God.
Maybe that's why he's so pissed.
Oh my
God.
Man,
Abstinence is bad. Kids, practice responsible. Practice responsible sex education instead of abstinence. Oh my God.
Wow,
Why
you
is
couldn't
this
get
a
through
part of
that
this
at all.
podcast?
Anyways,
Hi, yes, if there are any 12-year-olds listening to this podcast in, like, Missouri...
So,
fucking
LeeRoy,
misery.
dear sweet LeeRoy, please tell us about the story of this game.
so they're dedicating now to research how does Zenith work? What is going to happen? How can we preserve Zenith, or how can we solve Zenith? Right, because Sullivan is incredibly mad that his wife had to die, and he doesn't understand why. And Sullivan says to Rowan that I do understand why your wife died. I know why she died. It is these quartz crystals. These control why people live and die in the Tower of Basel. And so they do that. They do this laborious experiment with the quartz. They have 20 quartz smashed up to 20 children, and every year they break a quartz and they find out if one of these kids die. I don't know why they need to do 20 of these.
why they had to do it on children as opposed to old people.
Right, it's overkill. But they did 20. They needed to be completely and absolutely sure, apparently.
I can answer those questions. It needs to be children because it's only easy to identify the quartz for a newborn.
For a new quartz and a newborn, that makes sense.
Yeah, and they 20. It's scientific repetition.
Yeah.
That's something I really like.
Oh yeah, sample size. Okay, yeah.
I realize sample size, but then it's like
the actual kind of thing that doesn't make any sense is why do they have to do one a year?
I don't know.
Why can't they just wait 6 months and just do them all then? What difference does the age of the child make?
So they don't really divulge at why their exact details of their experiment, but it happens. And turns out Leanne is the last of these experiments, and she doesn't know I don't know. I'm not sure she knows the full details of the experiments. I'm pretty sure she doesn't, but she does know she only.
I don't even think she comes to learn it. I don't think she ever learns it at all.
I don't think. I think she learns it at the very end. But
she gets the book of the scientist's notes.
Right. But I'm talking about where I'm relating this to now why she's jumping off the building. But she does know. She does know she only has a year to live, and she apparently resolves to go out in her own way, the way she decides to. But then there's the whole scene with Zephyr, and then
she survives,
and then the so-called miracle happens. But so there's a lot of filler that happens. They establish kind of the relationship between the Cardinals and the normal people, and you also do a lot of gameplay because it's a video game. And it's rather pointless content until the Christmas episode, where Leanne finally gets to resolve to confront Rowan because she's always felt that she needed closure. She's even though, well, someone should talk about Zephyr, though, because that's pretty... Well, okay, I'll finish off with this, and then we can talk about Zephyr.
Finish off with this.
Yeah, I'll finish off with this. So, because Leanne's way more interesting, anyways. Leanne needed, even though she was feeling stable and happy with Vashron and Zephyr, despite the harassment, but she needed closure, and she went to meet with Rowan. And when Rowan found out that Leanne was alive, he knew immediately that Sullivan had betrayed him. He doesn't know why, he doesn't know how, but he knew Sullivan betrayed him, and he became incredibly angry. And he went to take revenge on his partner, Sullivan. Prior to these events, though, you see Rowan and Sullivan in conference with each other, and Sullivan hands him a ring and says, "I finished. This is the key to Zenith. It is all done." And he hands him his wife's ring, and so that's so that their research is done according to Sullivan. Everything they've strived for is finished, and all the prelate wants is to figure out why his wife died, and to somehow maybe even bring her back. Whatever. That's kind of like the whole theme here. He's angry about the death of his wife, and he wants to fight death. And so,
well, a promise is a promise.
and so that's the motivation of Rowan's involvement, and Sullivan's involvement is much more selfish and much more interesting, but I'll get to that later. And so now this is the end of the game is Leanne finds her kind of like father surrogate, the scientist guy who performed the experiments, and they find out he really doesn't have any more involvement with it anymore, and so they go to the guy higher up, Sullivan, which they do meet up with Sullivan, and all they're there for is Leanne's quartz, because they know Leanne's quartz wasn't broken, because obviously she's still alive. And Sullivan says, "I don't have it." And Rowan shows up and just shoots him, and it's one of the more shocking moments of the game, where I was just like, okay, what do we do now? And then Rowan's just there, mad, and shoots the guy. And now for some reason...
because you kind of figured that guy was going to be the actual final boss.
Right, you thought...
I kind of figured
they
that
were
he was
building
the
up to
guy.
something like that, but then Rowan's just really mad. And yeah, that happens. And then guns are suddenly treated as lethal, too. But... So then he's dead, and Rowan has a soliloquy back at the head base, the top of the clock tower, and he finds himself unable to finish his research. Everything's done. He has achieved everything, and he's just incredibly empty. He found out that he strived for the miracles. He's kept saying miracles versus science, and he's been able to make a miracle with science, I will say. And he doesn't feel any satisfaction from this. He actually feels incredible guilt seeing Leanne still alive and seeing the evidence of his experiments. And so instead he gets his most trusted subordinates to come and defend Basilia, and because he knows Leanne's gonna come for closure, and he's decided to kill them instead, to cut off all ties, to become completely empty, and to or if it comes to it, to die by the hands of Leanne. Either way, he wants to have this grandstand. He's like really selfish to the end in this case. And so you do a really cool final dungeon, and you fight people that you didn't think you'd fight, and they kind of shoehorned.
Yeah, because they all kind of show up to protect the power structure,
right?
which is an interesting politic.
They show like they've always supported this cardinal, but they never really established how the pecking order of the cardinal. So it seems a little loose, although it makes total sense, and I appreciate it. I wish the politics were a little more developed there. But then you defeat the cardinals, and you come up to Rowan, and you even defeat Rowan, and you confront Rowan. You want to know why he's doing this. You want to know if he has Leanne's quartz. He doesn't answer anything. All he wants to do is to die. So here, Rowan also wishes to, he wants just to commit suicide. He's trying to commit suicide, much like Zephyr has done earlier. And so Rowan and Zephyr become kind of foils at this moment. But Zephyr, being Zephyr, is like, okay, that's what you want. And he raises his gun up and he kills him. And he shoots him straight through the heart, and that would be a killing blow, except, that sacred mark appears, and he doesn't actually die. He comes to life. He comes back to life. And what I've from one cutscene, I've decided that those sacred marks are, like Zenith seems to be self-aware, and those sacred marks are people that are required for the continuation of Basel as it exists. So if someone... They're called the so-called Warriors of Zenith, as stated by one character one time in a single cutscene.
What?
Yeah.
I don't remember this at all.
There's the girl with horns on her head and wings.
Oh, wow.
She kills.
She has
Vastron.
lines?
She has very few lines. She has like 3. She kills Vastron
total.
And a secret mark appears, and he lives. And she says, "Oh, I cannot believe a Warrior of Zenith still exists." And so and Vastron lives. And so then, when Rowan dies, he's also, at that moment, a warrior of Zenith, of course, a defender of Zenith in that case. And so he also lives from that exchange. And since he's alive, he's finished. He even got the closure he desired. And it's really futile. He didn't get anything he wanted, even though he has everything he wants. And so I believe he goes into Zenith, and he restores Zenith to its original function. And there's another cutscene between Rowan and Sullivan, where they say Zenith was invented to cure cancer and also bring about the immortality of man. That was the original purpose of Zenith, but at some point it became what it is now at Basel. And so I think Rowan comes in, uses the ring Sullivan developed, and restores Zenith to its original function, removing quartz forever. And that is why there's no sacred marks when the Cardinals die originally, especially there's no sacred mark when Sullivan dies. But Sullivan and those two Cardinals he killed come back to life with those miracle marks. At that point, Rowan restores immortality to all inhabitants on Basel. But then, at the end...
And for the record, this is the ending of the game.
Yeah, this is just at the end of the game. There's no other plot except right here at the end of the game. And it requires incredibly paying attention to really obscure details. And I'm basically going Vadi video on you all right now. But then, so Sullivan leaves with the dragon girl, who I'm going to... My next theory is that this girl is someone who's able to live outside of Basel in this uninhabitable Earth. So she's like a new type, an involved human who has a greater connection to the current conditions of Earth as it is now. And she knows a lot more about what Basel is and why it exists. And for some reason, she has... Sullivan has a caretaking relationship with her, but all Sullivan wanted to do was to leave Basel. So that's why when he comes back to life at the end of, that he leaves Basel because now he can survive outside of Basel. And then, you also see Leanne Zephyr and Vacheron outside in the green where there's no green on the clock tower. So you see them outside of Basel as well. So these characters.
If that's not heaven.
If that is not heaven, sure. If they didn't, there's a lot of interpretations you could take since they give you nothing.
Because
I'm sorry, I know that's a legitimate interpretation, but that's the thing that frustrates me.
Yeah, that it is a legitimate interpretation is frustrating. But the only piece of evidence really that's on screen for it is the fact that the color palette in that sequence is completely different to the entire rest of the game.
I've chosen to believe in this elaborate truth because the game is elaborate itself too. It's dressing up all these things. And
the other thing I wanted to find out, isn't there actually I forget, isn't there a piece of the game where there's literally this is the door to Basel, you can leave here?
Yeah, they talk about.
I don't think I've ever gone there.
That doesn't happen in the story, but they talk about the outside of Basel, and when you come up to Sullivan, you actually end up at the edge. Sullivan lives on the very edge of Basel, which I think, that communicates his longing to finally leave Basel. Mm-hmm. And he lives right there on the edge of Basel, and you can see the door. When you confront him, you can see that final door that leads outside of Basel.
Well, yes and no, because he lives at the top of the tower.
Well, it also says the outer edges. It's the wall of the tower. Yeah, he also lives at the top of the tower, so he can't leave from there, you're right. But he also lives where he can always see the outside.
Yeah. I hadn't kind of thought of that one.
Never underestimate the therapeutic power of a window office.
It's true that the very last thing could be in heaven, but the thing that that shows that, at least I think that Zenith actually turned on and restored to its function of just curing cancer, making humans ageless, is that Sullivan is not a guardian of I don't think he's a guardian of Zenith, but he comes back to life anyways, and you see him outside with that girl. Not anywhere particular. You can actually see Basel in the background, so he definitively has left Basel.
And also something that happens in the last scene is Leanne holds her hand up to the sun and looks through it, and early on there's a scene where you give a guy his quartz, and the quartz is held up to the light and it shines, and so do his eyes. And the same thing happens with Leanne when she's looking
that's a good point.
At the light through her hand, which if Zenith did turn back on and make everyone ageless, it probably turned everyone into their own quartz.
Yeah, probably. Something like that.
Yeah, it looks like she's got the quartz crystal is actually part of her hand or something.
Yeah.
I think it's not true that they gain immortality, but they gain a lifespan as long as quartz would last, right? So Zenith no longer shatters quartz on its own. Quartz is quartz, and you have your quartz. That's what happens.
All of which begs the question, what does any of this imply from a thematic perspective?
Well, can I do my... Because I...
You probably have the best knowledge of religious philosophy not theocracy, theology. Yeah, theology.
Well,
I have some interpretations, but let's hear it.
I do have a specific thing on this. So there is in Western philosophy a paradox about miracles, right? It's usually attributed to David Hume. And the paradox is this: a miracle is something God does, right? and it is a violation of the natural order. Otherwise, it's not miraculous. The problem is that God is a creator. God is responsible for the natural order. So for God to create a miracle is for God to go against themselves, which is contrary to the idea of God being immaculate and
Zenith's
perfect.
independent actions are still, by that definition, miracle.
Well, this is the paradox, and I think the game, this is why I say miracles are central to the theme of the game, because Zenith is presented as a broken machine. Yeah, as the controlling influence on Basel, which is a broken machine. And there's no... Like, the natural order is broken in Basel as well. There's the point about day and night cycles being out of line. The point that human lifespans are now tied to quartz, but this is a really kind of inconsistent system because quartz is fragile, and you actually see somebody breaking their quartz partway through the game and then instantly dying. So... For my money, Zenith isn't fixed at the end of the game.
Well, I don't believe Zenith is fixed. I'm just saying the quartz is restored to its original function. Zenith no longer breaks quartz, is what I was saying. But
perhaps. But I kind of... There's this whole question of kind of science versus faith that's at work in Rowan's monologues through the game. And that's a really reductive question, generally. But in this world, it becomes compelling because, on the one hand, you've got a god that is clearly an artifact, is clearly an engineering project, a product of science. But you've also got a religion that seems to appeal to something greater. So in that attract mode cutscene where Rowan encounters Zenith, he rejects violently the idea that this can be the god that he's believed in all along.
Yeah, there's something... It's clearly concealed from the public that Zenith is actually a machine.
Yeah, and the game is kind of about his crisis of faith and his search for a miracle to prove that there is a god. And at the end of the game, you get him surviving by the will of God, or possibly by the will of the machine.
Well, the god is the machine.
If the machine isn't in the imitation of God, and there's actually also a god,
it's possible.
Yeah, that was always the way I read it, was there is actually a god, and then there is this machine that humans have tried to achieve godhood, which is where the Tower of Babel metaphor comes in.
But the thing is,
for them to climb to heaven.
If Rowan's quartz like everyone else, Zenith literally has thrall of his quartz and can choose when he lives and dies. But
yeah,
it's also possible because... what's up, Devin?
I would just wanted to say that it is a very Western-influenced game, but Japanese influence might be leaking through because local gods exist, and objects that have been taken care of for a long time have their own little patron deities in... I forget the...
Right,
Shinto.
which is how the Shinto temples work.
It's interesting that the local... I mean, of course, the god exists, but it's subverted that the god exists and it's not a god this time.
Unless there is also a god.
Yeah, of course.
And no one's been tending to the machine, obviously, because the machine got broken somehow.
It's like... I mean, it's like FF7. Is Cloud a clone or is he not? I mean, the Resonance of Fate is deliberately open-ended like that, where you're going to have to decide, well, what does this mean? Is there a God? You have the crisis of faith yourself. Did God do this, or did Zenith do this?
There is one other dimension to the ending that we haven't mentioned, and it is a silly thing, and I think it's very dangerous to read too much into it. But in addition to Rowan surviving at the moment of the gunshot, there is a sudden, completely inexplicable, and persisting through the remainder of all the cutscenes, it starts raining cherry blossom.
Yeah, it does.
Which can only be
Zenith
miraculous in that context. Like, there are no trees up there, let alone cherry trees. And there are no seasons, or maybe there are seasons, but there's no kind of day-night cycle or anything. But there's this cherry blossom coming from somewhere. And even if you don't think it's literal cherry blossom, it's a symbol of something. You know, we can read a lot into that, and maybe we don't need to, but it says something has changed about the world in a big way that doesn't match the mechanical pattern. I don't think you see a plant in the game until that point.
No. Actually, there is the point where you go get the mannequin in the second chapter, and their baby's breath as the backdrop to the.
Oh, sorry, yes,
right.
there
And
is-
it's like
there's-
this. It's like the simplest flowers that exist, except they're really impressive because nobody's seen flowers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this, the scene where the cherry blossom starts falling, you're literally right at the top of the tower.
Yeah.
You're as high as you can go, and there's visibly no trees above you that could be raining cherry blossom down. And I took that as indicating that the influence of Basel, of Zenith, of the tower and the machine, had been broken, and now the actual god was able to work miracles again.
Okay.
That's interesting as well.
Again, it's imputing a lot of meaning to this, but so much of the game.
The only, I'm not going counter to that. That's just the only thing. I think it's established that Zenith can also create miracles, and so that's where, yeah.
Well, Zenith can only create miracles that we have seen.
That we understand. The quartz. That's it.
Well, specifically, it only creates the miracles pertaining to life and death.
Yeah.
And only the life and death of people.
Yeah, I wasn't implying that Zenith could possibly do the cherry blossoms.
No, but like the
So that could be the critical difference that speaks to possibly the difference between the mechanical god and the real god, the real god, whatever. But what is real?
The god of
the thing, particularly the idea of Zenith's miracles, plays into this paradox of, can you have an order that also goes against itself? Because a machine is an order.
Yeah.
It's an arrangement of parts that work in a consistent way. So is anything miraculous that the machine does? Because theoretically, if you know everything about the machine, you can predict what it's going to do. So the miracles of Zenith are miracles only because we don't understand Zenith, rather than miracles in a transcendent religious sense that would be impossible for us to track, or impossible for people in the world to track.
Which would be fine. Actually, does kind of make sense that they don't understand how this machine works, because the machine itself is assumed to be extremely old.
Yeah.
Yes.
I actually think that's part of the reason why it works on clockwork.
They can no longer maintain it, and that's why it takes so long for Sullivan to even understand how to even change anything about it.
Right. Like there's clearly like an order of people that are intended to. There's clearly like an order of people that are intended to like preserve the machine or whatever, but clearly they've gotten less and less better at it over time because the machine keeps degrading.
Well, they even mention, like a couple of NPCs mention that the most valuable resource in the world is the oil on the clock's gears, which it's not valuable because they need it to keep the gears oiled. It's valuable because they harvest it from the gears to use for other things.
Oh wow, that says a lot, and that's really that's a super practical answer to a really abstract game.
And thinking about like where Zenith is too, it's almost as if the entire clock tower, the whole entire Tower of Basel itself is the structure of Zenith running. That is the clockwork of Zenith, the whole tower. And as the tower decays,
that's my interpretation of it.
As the tower decays, Zenith is also decaying. I just realized that.
I definitely think so. And like you hit just on that particular note, when you get down to the bottom, if you look around, it's clear that the local terrain out to quite a radius out from the tower is actually part of the mechanism.
Yeah.
Like it's on bits of mechanism that are turning around. It's clearly also inhabited. Like if you go down there at night, it's lit up like cityscape, and you never meet any of the people from down there.
Well, that's where I thought there's an evolved race that are no longer human, because that's the only thing that could explain the Dragon Girl.
Which all of which points to my biggest theory about this game, which is that somebody from Tri-Ace played Dragon Quarter and said, "This game is awesome." It's just like, we need to make the sequel to Dragon Quarter, and they're like, well, what do we need to do first? You know how Dragon Quarter is like 12 hours, and that's awesome? Let's make it like 60.
That's even more awesome.
Yes, it's like 5 times the awesome.
I mean, these are the people who literally made a game with a subtitle "Till the End of Time."
That's true. And then it turned out the end of time was finding out the ear to goddamn MMO.
Yeah, the end of time is the grind.
actually, till the end. You know what till the end of time is? No, till the end of time. Actually, this is a thing that everybody should remember about till the end of time. Is that it actually puts? It was an attempt to create a Tri-Ace fictional universe.
All the Star Oceans.
All of the Star
especially.
Oceans happened inside of that MMO.
What?
And
Are you serious?
And Valkyrie Profile.
That's worse than the Dark Tower, like 100%. And that,
Wait, the Dark Tower?
I think, Stephen King novels where it's all interrelated for no reason at all.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Does that mean that like Resonance of Fate is also in that universe?
Probably might as well.
No, actually, because they completely blew it up with Star Ocean 4. Because it was a huge
Oh, thank God for that.
And now we just have integrity and faithlessness.
Faithlessness for sure.
Integrity and faithlessness is like it's just another one of those things where it's just like, well, shit, they put another awesome subtitle on a video game. I'm probably going to play it and be really disappointed because it's Trace. You know?
I tried really hard to interpret the game in line with its themes, and I kind of got it. I kind of got it. I don't.
I guess the other thing is that, like, okay, there are a few things that I want to just kind of respond to in terms of the analysis. One, the cloud as a clone thing works because it actually relates to...
Right. It's directly related to everything the whole game's thematically setting up.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's just kind of like whether Cloud is a clone or not is arguably kind of irrelevant because it matters that he chooses to do the things that he do and is an authentic person. It's just existentialism.
This is also why my interpretations they hinge not on what happens after, but what does happen in the events of the game is really what I focused on.
Right. Which requires a little bit of leap of faith itself.
Yeah, it does. And it's still paradoxical to the end, even as Rowan's embodying, a classic paradox of miracles or science. The Rowan becomes a paradox himself when he chooses to die and is unable to. And Resonance of Fate, it goes out of its way to explicitly detail suicides and also reject them. Where Leanne jumps off the building and she can't die. She doesn't die. They don't die because they can't die. And then this is more for the characters, but Vastron gives up and he was going to die at the end of the Cardinal, which we never got to Zephyr. I mean, we never got to explain Zephyr's story, but he chooses to give up there, but Leanne saves him and he doesn't die even though he really wants to. But Leanne says, "What does that mean? Why did you save me if this is how you are?" And they both are really sad teens, and I liked it. I
Zephyr, if you like RPGs with scowling sad boys, Zephyr will fulfill your needs.
But Zephyr's also he's unstable. If you like Adachi, then this is your game. But
yeah, like if you want the edgiest sad boy of all time,
play a better game, but also maybe try this if you also
try this, but for definite put Zephyr in his B outfit.
So Rowan and Zephyr both. I'll just be direct since we're probably not going to get to it. Zephyr, he shot up a school. He's a school shooter. He shot up his orphanage and school he lived in because he could not take living in that circumstance anymore. He shot up the school.
Is that why he did it? I don't think I ever got an explanation.
There is no
explanation.
There's no clear explanation.
So that's the only explanation I can think of is he shot up the school. I mean, the other explanation.
Man defined by his actions, I guess.
The other explanation is because he felt like it, right? So we're going to humanize Zephyr here, and he was.
Here's the other thing about Zephyr, and this is the thing that makes it kind of disturbing, is that Zephyr continues to just really enjoy killing people.
Yeah, he does.
He's kind of a sick person.
He clinically probably a psychopath.
Yeah, no, I mean, and we're not using that term lightly. Zephyr is a psychopath. He is.
He spends the entire intro, the opening cutscene, before the title screen, trying to kill Vashron, and Vashron was ready to kill him because he was just going berserk.
Oh, that was another one of the miracles, right? That actually
he stuck the gun in Zephyr's mouth and shot him, and Zephyr lived.
Yeah. Which is really weird, because it's one of those times where the game doesn't actually explain what happened. Because the thing is that if guns work how guns are supposed to work, then Zephyr's brain would be on the floor.
No, that's the point. They have a cutscene flashing back to explanations of miracles, and he's just like, "Look, I know we were supposed to execute him. I put my gun in his mouth, aimed at his brain, and pulled the trigger twice. He's still alive. something happened.
Oh, well, he said that's the will of your God. What are you going to do? That's what he tells the Cardinal.
Yeah.
And then that's when the Cardinal says, "I'm going to reject God." Haha. But
Yeah.
But so we're establishing that Zephyr and Rowan have things they do not want to live anymore because of things they committed in the past. They're done with their guilt. They're done living, and because their existence is too much because of their memories. They're constantly reminded of these sins they've committed, and so Rowan, he decides to go out in a blaze of glory. Except he can't. He cannot die. He does not die, and so that's the paradox. There's no paradox here really. It's more like the authorial coming down and saying these characters, they cannot commit suicide. They're not allowed to commit suicide. Suicide's not an option. And so they both get to humanize and give these characters the agency of having their suicide, and then also saying suicide's impossible in your world circumstance. And so there's just a constant futility in the game, and you feel it when you're playing the game because it certainly feels futile. And so you put in Saffron and Vesher put in this huge effort to get Leanne's quartz back, and they can't get it back. And so they put in this huge effort to confront Rowan, and they can't get any closure on Rowan either. So all that happens is Zephyr gets really mad, shoots Rowan, he comes back to life. He has a tantrum and they leave. That's pretty much the ending of the game and the character arcs here. And so all the dressing, all the settings, the characters struggle really hard, and nothing happens. They get nothing, and I'm reminded of Dark Souls.
Yeah, no, this is really a very frustrating game for all of these reasons. What was I going to say?
So the paradox here is how they tried really hard to make a change in government, or make a change at all, or do anything.
They tried so hard and got so far, but in the end,
it didn't even matter.
It didn't really matter.
Except for the cherry blossoms. Except for the cherry blossoms.
But they did nothing.
It's a consolation prize.
They didn't shoot the cherry blossoms.
I'm pretty sure Zephyr and Vacheron. I'm pretty sure Zephyr and Leanne didn't even kiss or anything.
No, they didn't
there
kiss.
Was nothing.
They didn't kiss or anything.
They just reaffirmed
they had
what
an
they said
anime
at the beginning
romance.
of the game. It was like
she kisses him on the cheek. She kisses him on the cheek because at the end of the wedding cutscene, where they're in the fake wedding together, and she asks him for the kiss, he's got lipstick on his cheek.
Oh yeah, this is at the end of 2 Christmas chapters, I think.
And
it's at the end of the wedding, which is the first of the Christmas chapters.
Say also that Zenith embodies that transhumanist ideal, right? We're going to cure cancer. People aren't going to age. We're not going to get ill anymore. And then Zenith gets changed into making it so humans get governed how they were before Zenith. And so it shows even more no hope, nihilism, emptiness, and that Zenith itself was altered and corrupted because humans will always, be self-destroy themselves in that way, and they will struggle and nothing will happen, nothing will come of it. And so, it keeps repeating that theme, the theme of nothing. And so, the only thing you can really pull out of Resonance of Fate is how the three protagonists desire to live, they try to live, and they accomplish, they are able to live. And that's all. That's the only theme. That's the only constant theme of the game. That isn't nihilism.
Yeah, no, and that's really weird contrasted with, not even contrasted, but just, compared to all the religious miracle stuff, because all of the miracles just add up to, non-change, just all of the
miracles all sustain the status quo.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the weird part, is, the miracles don't do anything.
Well, that's
one of the good commentary on religion, but...
Yeah.
The game's commentary on actual religions is really clumsy, but that does... That theme of kind of miracles that add up to nothing does play into this idea of stasis that permeates the game. That all the stuff that is happening now isn't changing anything, and all the changes happened in the past, and kind of the plot being archaeological, forensic.
I can accept it on its terms too, as I've been in dark places, and I've ideated suicide before myself, and so that these characters, they don't really accomplish a lot, and I don't feel like I accomplished a lot, but they're able to continue living, right? And they kind of lose their ideations over time, and they try really hard and they don't get a lot done, but so do I try really hard and I don't get a lot done.
What's that TV trope? It's the TV trope of fictional interpretation is everybody is Jesus in purgatory, and it's that's the
God, that's a terrible idea.
No, but
I don't know what that trope is.
that's the joke, is that you can take any fiction and argue that every character is Jesus and that they're all in purgatory.
Everyone's in a coma. Or
no, you can just argue that everybody is Jesus. Like, you can always argue with every single piece of fiction that everybody is Jesus and they're all in purgatory. Like, these are the two easiest interpretations to do of fiction.
They're two separate interpretations.
Yeah, they're two separate ones.
Okay.
Well,
Jesus
you can do them. You can do them both at the same time.
But like,
maybe they're in a coma and they're also Jesus in purgatory.
Yeah, no, it's kind of.
But to finish off what I was saying, the strongest point in the game for me was when Zephyr is like, "Why don't I want to die? Let me die." And Leon says, "Think about what you've done for me. Think about all you've done. You can't die. What does it mean? What does everything you've done mean if you die right here?" And Zephyr doesn't answer because he can't answer, and that's like,
because there's no meaning.
Right, there is no meaning. But that's the thing that's the most tactful, probably unauthored, but the most tactful about suicide is they're really, despite how much you put meaning into it or take away meaning from it, like there's no great meaning behind suicide. It's not this great romantic act. It's just
which is kind of the thing that the game wants to say to Ro. This game is almost like cynical in its in its treatments of subjects like that.
Very cynical.
Its anti-suicide statements are not like, oh well, there's lots of reasons to keep living.
No,
it's just kind of like there's literally no reason to kill yourself because death is just as pointless as living.
Well, it's more like the circumstances surrounding you will not accept your death, which is like. It's not so much comforting as it is like a realistic take on it.
Right. It's just like you have responsibilities as a person, which is really actually kind of unhealthy.
It is.
It's not a good commentary on suicide.
It's not a good commentary. I think it's just one of the most grounded takes because it doesn't. We
should also note that this is Tri-Ace's last game, and they knew it was their last game, so maybe a little bit of that was.
It doesn't go the Danganronpa route where it's like, if you hope, if you believe in yourself, you'll lose these things. It's like, that's not true. There's no surefire way to get out of it, and that's all Resident Fate says though. That's all they say is there's nothing you can do really, and then that's it. It ends.
Yeah, that's okay.
Resonance of Fate. Fuck if I know.
Fuck if I know.
But
so I think that answers our.
That's why I think it's cool.
I think that answers our first question, which was
my
question about what everybody thought the ending was about, because I didn't get it at all.
Let's move on to the rest of the questions.
Yeah.
2 hours and 10 minutes into the recording. Holy shit!
By the way,
Good job,
I just want to say
everyone.
the ending was probably like 20 minutes of cutscenes, but it takes like forever to explain it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. From my friend Fence Dude. Really, why did you play this game for? Okay.
I liked it.
I played this game.
I enjoyed playing it, as frustratingly paced as it was, and I just got a lot out of the combat system because it spoke to exactly like my tendencies as a game player.
To be honest, like I honestly really enjoy incredibly difficult games and systems that stop making sense because they made them way too hard, or even like, okay, so I can't call Resident Fate's a masterwork. It's not really making a commentary on its difficulty, so never mind. But it's just it's just absurdly hard, and you have to think out of the box all the time. So I found myself entertained by that a lot of the time, and I was, you could tell I was really trying to piece together that story. I'm like, I gotta make sense of this stupid story, and I did. And so both those things, they entertained me throughout the very long length of the game.
Yeah, I played it, I played a little bit of this in 2010, not long after it came out, and found it really intriguing, but really hard. And then coming back to it now, like my main interest in it is the time it came out and its position in the history of the genre, which I know is a question we're coming to. But like, I love the world. Just in terms of visually and conceptually, this setting is really cool. Not necessarily in a deep way, but I think they did interesting things with it.
Yeah.
And yeah, like 20 hours of this game were really good, and I wish I hadn't had to slog through the other 40 to get to them.
It could have been shorter, way shorter.
Yeah, I agree.
So much shorter,
if it had been half its length. If it had been half its length, it would have been perfect, and you just started with dual wielding.
It's twice as long as Kingdom Hearts 1, and it has half the worthwhile content, so...
Yeah, and Kingdom Hearts 1 has Atlantica.
Yeah.
Truth.
I feel compelled to bring this up just because Dark Souls and Resident of Fate have honestly the same exact thesis, But Resonance of Fate is a lot more human just because the three protagonists, they still have motivations. They still want to live.
Yeah, because you actually have fucking characters.
Yeah, they have characters that want
things that happen.
They still want to do things afterwards, right? But Dark Souls, there's no face to it. So faceless nihilism is a lot less comforting than nihilism has a face on it. I don't get the comfort other people get out of Dark Souls. That's all I was gonna say about that.
Right. Yeah, because Dark Souls makes no relation to anything human.
Dark Souls makes me depressed because it's about nothing, and then it says, "Well, everything's about nothing if you think about it." And I'm like, okay.
Okay, Jerry.
Okay, and as for why I played it, I had hopes, and then they were dashed against the rocks, along with all my bezel.
So,
that's reductive.
pretty much.
I'm going to say people are going to say Dark Souls does have a lot of things that happen, and that's true. But whatever, I'm done.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the big question we have from Jackson, and I gave these my co-hosts time to prepare for this question because it's kind of a big one. Jackson says, I've been thinking a lot about accessibility and history with games and how to introduce folks to thinking critically about games outside of the current topical discussions of the moment. So my question is this. If you had to put together a short syllabus of JRPGs and related games for someone who wanted to understand the genre and its history, which games would you pick and why? And I put the additional restriction so we didn't get too wacky that it should be minimum 3 so we can get a decent breadth and maximum 6 so we don't just overwhelm people with suggestions.
JRPGs are so iterative. This just feels like trying to make a history of shoot 'em ups. It's like, which small definitions do I want to pick here? And I don't really. It's actually really incredibly difficult.
I had a really hard time picking my one Dragon Quest game because I knew there had to be one. You know?
Yeah, I also put the restriction that anyone should only pick one Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest for their list.
And I've already admitted I don't really have a lot of... I haven't played very many games that came after Final Fantasy VII, so I'm far stuck in the past with what I can recommend or even say. I have the history part of the history down, but I don't know...
Yeah, you see, I have the opposite problem, because, my knowledge of JRPGs basically starts with FF7. I dabbled in Chrono Trigger and FF6, but... the 2D era is closed to me. So, who wants to go first?
I'll go last.
Fuck it. I think I've got the most basic list here. I listed Dragon Quest V because I feel like Dragon Quest V is the best iteration of the Dragon Quest series, and since the Dragon Quest series changes so little, I feel like you can understand the historical impact of Dragon Quest I as just by playing it. Because it's almost the same game, just with some other extra stuff tacked on, except it also has a plot. And Dragon Quest V's story is the clearest exhalation of the franchise's extremely conservative values, and it is the clearest exhalation of specifically the series' extremely conservative values about work and labor, which so much of JRPGs has been working to interrogate since then. Final Fantasy VII, obviously, just it's the biggest
surprise.
It's the genre's biggest commercial moment. It turned JRPGs into big business for a very short period of time. It made Square probably the most important game developer on the planet for a pretty short period of time. And it also just made the genre really popular with a lot of people who'd never played it before. But aside from that, it's also a critical investigation of exactly those kinds of relations of work and labor. It's a critical investigation of those of the relationship between work and labor, and basically just kind of a political deconstruction of all of the values that Dragon Quest extols. And the rest of the list was actually really hard for me to pick, because if I had to pick two, it was like those would be the two. The rest of it got kind of hard to justify ones against the other. I picked Kingdom Hearts because I feel like it kind of represents the direction that JRPGs are starting to go. More action-oriented, and also just kind of... I don't know. Kingdom Hearts seemed like a right pick when I first picked it a few hours ago, but now I'm actually kind of having a hard time justifying it against Tales of Phantasia, which was actually the first real action RPG that I can think of, and also was one of the first JRPGs to have a story with any kind of deconstructive elements in it, aside from establishing the Tales franchise, which is one of the most consistently popular. I guess, let's say, Tales of Phantasia, Resonance of Fate. actually I picked because it represents
Wow.
like RJ has been picking throughout this, RJ has been saying throughout this entire podcast. It represents kind of like the existential crisis moment in mid 2000s, early 2010s JRPGs, where everybody's just trying to figure out like, okay, where do we want to go next, and then like it's just that's just kind of wandering. And then if I had to pick one last one, Resonance of Fate, Kingdom Hearts, Tales of Phantasia, action RPGs. God, this is difficult, actually. This is a lot more difficult. If you just asked me which one to play, I'd say Final Fantasy IX, but I can't, that's...
Yeah, the history part muddles it up a lot.
Yeah, the historically important ones part makes it really, really, really difficult to actually say.
Because if it's up to me, I'll just hand everyone Paper Mario if that's in your door. It's not good for history, but it's good to. It's like it's a really good basis for what I like in JRPGs.
I had a thought and then I lost it, but I think those 5 kind of just say everything. I think there's one from like every major period. There isn't one from like the past 5 years, but that's the past 5 years. We can't even say if any of the games from the past 5 years are like all-time classics, So
Resonance of Fate is absolutely not accessible either. Contrast all those other games.
Yeah.
I remember the accessibility being one of the notes on his question.
Yeah.
LeeRoy?
Okay. I have a greater interest right now in like where did these things start. So my list is more kind of slanted that way, and so although this game is absolutely not accessible, I'd advocate the first Fire Emblem, which is how every single strategy RPG afterwards what they're modeled after, and it was the first popular incarnation of that really grid-based tactical approach to JRPGs.
There is also a DS remake, which might be more accessible.
Right, yeah, it is actually a lot
Oh,
more accessible.
you know what? I remembered
It's
what my other
comforting.
one was.
What is it?
It's Megami Tensei, the original Megami Tensei, mostly because it's the first Pokemon game, actually.
Yeah. I
That's
also
pretty much it.
I argued whether I want to put Megami Tensei or Shin Megami Tensei on there, but I went for Shin Megami Tensei because it's a lot more easier. It's a lot more accessible. It was the one that actually gained traction in Japan. Now the other ones were middling successes, and because of Shin Megami Tensei, a game like Demon Gaze came out like a few years ago. Like the first-person 1980s dungeon crawl RPG is alive because Shin Megami Tensei proudly, carried that flag this whole time, and so it's that context for maybe for that the JRPG style before Dragon Quest, even though it came out after. It's the most indicative representation of the old Japanese computer RPG.
Yeah, and most importantly, it's the one that has like the closest ties to like the Western design philosophies associated. Like
You just got real quiet.
What?
You just got real quiet.
I don't know why that happened.
The
Can't explain
connections,
why that.
you're a bit muddy.
Huh?
Yeah.
Skype being fucky, I think, but
All I was trying to say was that the Shin Megami Tensei games, up until Shin Megami Tensei, up until the PS1 generation, they were just like some of the last RPGs period to have like that first-person grid-based thing going on up until the genre revival, and that makes it like the closest relative to Wizardry, which is a Western series but was extremely influential on every JRPG franchise.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's still like the core roots of what JRPGs are.
Yeah.
And
basically, Shin Megami Tensei was just like, well, what if we made a Wizardry game? Whereas Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy are like, well, what if we made an Ultima game?
Yeah, that's the divergence exactly. And Kingdom Hearts is a good pick for when action RPGs went 3D, but Ys is the most representative of action RPGs as they exist 2D. It takes Zelda, and then it's like, okay, but now Zelda's an RPG, and that's what the Ys games are like, and they're incredibly accessible because they have more of a Dragon Quest philosophy, and they're really easy to jump into.
They are very easy to get into.
Yeah, except for the boss fights. But yeah, Ys 1 and 2 is an incredibly great package, and it shows what action RPGs were doing, because action RPGs didn't really have any like American representation or localization for a long time, even though they have been happening since like before Dragon Quest, because Dragon Slayer came out influenced by the Tower of Daruga, I think. And so, I mean, on PCs, action RPGs have been around for quite a while, but everyone has to make fun of turn-based stuff anyways. But yeah, Ys is, that 2D philosophy of action RPGs that's still around with like Sword of Mana or I should say, I don't even know what they're called. Secret of Mana?
The Mana
yeah, the
series.
Mana series continued that, that just like Ys, but, the Square Enix take on it. And Kingdom Hearts is clearly influenced by the Mana series, but is better, definitely better than the Mana series. And then I would pick Final Fantasy IV for being... Final Fantasy IV is the most representative of what the West thinks of JRPG is, which, for our perspective, is, really... It's really influential, and it was also like I think it was the first really plot-heavy JRPG outside of like a lot of the text in Mother, which wasn't really plot, but there's a lot of text in Mother.
Yeah, and I think it even managed to come out before Dragon Quest V did, and Dragon Quest V was the first actually plot-heavy Dragon Quest game.
It's before Phantasy Star 2 and Dragon Quest V, which are also very plot-heavy games, but they're in the wake of Final Fantasy IV, and that that's like that tonal shift where JRPGs are incredibly a lot closer to being fiction, being novels, being interactive fiction, if you want, because they're less about performing your actions onto the world and more about acting as these characters in a world.
Yeah, I actually really debated picking 4 instead of 7, but I couldn't justify it.
They both have different historical significance there, and then I personally would pick Mother for being the. It's you can see in also like in Pokemon, although Pokemon's kind of a compromise between Mother and Dragon Quest instead of being like against Dragon Quest. But Mother is a game where it's instead of like putting you in an RPG place, like I just said, for you to perform, it's a whole entire construction of a place that's performing for you. So all the RPG bits are just there for context specific only to this game, and so it's a lot of jokes, it's a lot of humor, and the whole game is like self-aware of being a video game. So it's that shining example of like JRPG development and self-awareness. Although when you play Mother or Earthbound, which is more accessible than the first one, they really just feel more like tone poems. They just feel like just really comfy. It's the dialogue doesn't really meet each other. They just kind of all trail off, and they're all individual thoughts. And you can see the influence on that in like Final Fantasy VII NPCs. You talk to them, and they also have, they're more melodramatic, but they have thoughts that aren't really, they're sort of related to themes, but not really. And they're just like, Mother really thought hard about how are NPC objects, how should they be treated, and how should a player, interact through the space. And I think that Mother is really important because of that. And that's my list. Well, besides Dragon Quest 1, you could also just see how did they interpret Ultima, but Dragon Quest 5 is probably way better to play.
It's also how did they interpret Zelda.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, it's a very Zeldaic structure.
That's a good word.
Zeldaic structure to the first Dragon Quest. RJ.
So I just was completely paralyzed by the question, to be honest. I don't feel like I have appropriate knowledge to answer it. I don't feel like I know enough of the right kind of games. I do want to kind of point out that there are at least 3 different questions that could be being asked here. The simplest of which is, if I want to understand the controller literacy of JRPGs, what do I play? The actual, how do I learn to play games in this genre? And that's got a reasonably straightforward answer. Something from the something very menu-based and turn-based from the SNES era. Something that's got an active time element.
People would probably say Chrono Trigger.
They should say FF9. Sorry, I'm just going to keep coming back to that.
Like FF9 would be a good example. You want a TRPG of some sort, maybe a Disgaea game. They're relatively representative, I think.
And easy to get into because you can just brute force everything instead of trying to bash your head against the wall.
A Tales game for action RPGs because they're usually the most kind of stable.
Consistent.
Yeah. And
Tales games are also they're not Zeldaic. they're the bridge between how you play a JRPG and also having the action combat, So they're a bit more representative of JRPG as that monolith.
Yeah, but so that's one history. Is like, if I want to be able to pick up a new JRPG and understand what's going on, what other games do I have to have played? Maybe also a Pokemon or a Paper Mario, I'm not sure which, but something in one of those traditions.
Pokemon is more relevant, definitely, for both cultures.
But there's also, there's the actual artistic history of Japanese games, which is a hugely complex issue. You have to go deep back into the bits of history that LeeRoy knows about, but you've also got to talk about games that we don't talk about a lot. So your Xenosagas and stuff get mentioned, and Xenosaga, for this purpose, would be in some ways a better game to look at than a Final Fantasy from the same era, or the Xeno games from that period would. Just because they're a bit more off the beaten track. But there are things further off the beaten track that you should go to, and I don't feel that I'm very literate in those, except for between 2006 and 2009. And you have to look at some game from that period, maybe Resonance of Fate, maybe Blue Dragon.
Yeah, that's something I was thinking about saying, is that video game history in general is about market penetration, and pretty much that's it. And so what we say is history is really just the refuse of our pop culture that we haven't really curtailed at all. And so
yeah, but I was coming to that.
Yeah. Sorry.
The third kind of history I want to identify is, how do I understand what people say about JRPGs now? Like the fact that the next game we are talking about for the podcast was in a Kotaku article a couple of weeks ago, calling it the best JRPG of the last 10 years when it's 11 years old, which Devin exploded about.
For an hour?
Yeah, for good reason, it has to be said.
I actually had no idea those games are that old. I straight up didn't.
Yeah,
2004.
Yeah.
But how do we get to a situation where a website like Kotaku can write a piece like that? And that has a history that is rooted in JRPGs, but you have to study a different set of JRPGs, and you have to play a different set of JRPGs. And I actually know, this is Jackson of Abnormal Mapping, if you go and listen to their podcasts on FF7 and FF8, a lot of what they talk about, because Jackson was new to those games, is how different those games actually are from their image.
Uh-huh.
And
yeah, absolutely.
for that reason, it's really important to play, I would guess, Chrono Trigger, FF7, Persona 4, and Xenoblade Chronicles, and see how much there's a mismatch between them and the hype. So you play each of those games, and then you just Google them, or you search Kotaku's archives and Edge's archives, and just look at, because that's how you understand what the JRPG means in the West, is you look at the games that get talked about and see how badly they are being talked about.
I would then no. I'm sorry. I gotta be a little imposing here and say that there's absolutely one game. There is one game that defines this entire discourse. It is Final Fantasy VIII. Like, if you want to talk about how the West dilutes JRPG discourse and JRPG history discourse, and how it distorts the image of what a game is, then look at Final Fantasy VIII, because Final Fantasy VIII is completely and absolutely and utterly different than everything it is talked about as being.
Yeah, I mean, FF8 is a good example. I think FF7 is the one to talk about because it's the landmark.
Yeah, I mean, FF7 has a similar problem, but not as big. It's basic. Yeah, I don't think, scale-wise, I think FF8, yeah.
I mean, that history is really a history of Western games writing, not a history of the JRPG. The history of the JRPG, you almost want to say, rather than picking games, we want to recommend studios or creative teams.
Lineages.
Yeah. I would say Square in the late 90s as opposed to any of their particular games.
Yeah.
What RJ is doing is really useful too. When you're talking about history, at least with console game history, especially, you should pick that gen. You should focus on that one gen. And so I know a lot about the old Nintendo and the PCs that are also popular during that time. And I mean, that's like this. That's like most of the extent of my knowledge, because it's hard to map out a history when you just go off of, well, here are the big games that penetrated the market in the West, so they're not really definitive of actually what the console produced.
Yeah,
which brings up
worth mentioning in that context, and this is a brief one, the project that I'm doing, very strongly influenced by Zoya Street's book Dreamcast Worlds, which is kind of the same project for a different console at a different time. But again, looks at some JRPGs that don't get a lot of talk in the West, so don't get a lot of talk as JRPGs. So read that. Sorry, Austin, you were saying.
Well, for one, sorry. Shouts to Zoyander. Also, the other thing being that in terms of the history of Japanese role-playing games is that ultimately, if you really, and I'm the worst possible person to be saying this, but like at some point you should try and learn fucking Japanese, because
I've been doing it.
yeah, because I mean, there's just a huge selections of games, many of which are fan translated, thank Christ. But like, you know, there's just a huge selections of games that didn't make it over to the West, and that you should play to understand JRPG history. Especially like, for example, like Terranigma. I think Terranigma is an actually really interesting and really important game. But like, it doesn't have any relevance to like the Western commercial history of the genre. Also, there's this entire dead fucking period of JRPG releases, because the JRPG was a console genre, and there's a lot of stuff, Legend of Heroes being one of the only franchise and one of the only series to actually get that kind of exposure in the West of early to mid 2000s budget computer JRPGs. And they didn't get any commercial attention for the West precisely because they are not they were PC games for what was perceived to be a console market.
And there's a specific gap with JRPGs and visual novels too, because they're so text heavy that people can approximate histories of Japanese platformers on their systems, because it's not difficult to broach it, right? But there's the explicit language barrier with our JRPGs that makes it so our history is like it doesn't really influence what the development side actually happened. You know, it does.
Yeah,
it does only at the very top of it. You know.
Yeah, that brings me to one other thing I wanted to mention is that if you're trying to understand the genre, you have to pick a lot of games from outside it as well, particularly visual novels and the classic kind of older visual novels. And you
by Clannad. Read it. It's good.
Yeah, and I think probably also because so much of the Japanese media is transmedia, is arranged around groups of companies working in different mediums. So a game will have a manga and an anime and whatever. You have to look at some non-game stuff as well.
Yeah, this is a thing I was going to say, was that, well, one, I don't want to call these non-games just politically, but a lot of the early JRPG developers, especially the ones who had an interest in telling the stories of the medium, were developed by people who had previous experience working on visual novels, and yes, eroge visual novels. That's a really under-talked part of the history because people don't like to talk about that.
The first two games made by Square were actually interactive fiction games. I played them both, and
yeah, and they're both really good, apparently.
They're pretty good. They're okay, but they're focused.
I've heard good things about them. Sorry,
entirely on the story. So
I do want to say part of my whole spiel along with my list.
Yeah, please.
Is
we took
being
over.
Part of my spiel along with my list is to say JRPGs are Japanese. Please don't turn them away just because they're not super into your like aesthetic choices, and they are. Even now there are games like Tears to Tiara and Utawareru Mono. I can't actually say the name of that.
Utawareru Mono.
Yeah, that one. Underwater Raymano.
Underwater Reaper. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Devin. Real quick. The other thing I was going to say is that if you're looking to understand historically, like a particular game, to try and understand Japanese pop media from around that time, like what were people watching and how would that have affected it? Because, like, for example, Final Fantasy VII came out in like 1997, late 1996 in Japan, 1997 in the US, and guess what had been airing all throughout 1995 and 1996? Even Neon Genesis Evangelion. So, like, oh, hey, we're gonna make a game that's like a huge deconstruction of the JRPG. What's our source here? I don't know. The game with the show with the giant robots? Like, yeah. Because, sorry, there's like so much overlap between FF7 and Evangelion, it's crazy. Sorry, go ahead.
Anyway, yeah. The whole thing is, like, it's Japanese, it's gonna be a little weird, but I do think everyone who wants to try JRPGs or give them a shot needs to take their time with them and just kind of let it wash over you a bit, and that might be a little hard at first, but it's worth it in my opinion, to just give things a shot. And I do have my list here of 6 games, and I went for some ones that I don't think anyone has talked on.
Drum roll, please.
Drum roll. Final Fantasy X
Okay.
is worth the time, in my opinion. I gave it a... I was really not into it when I played it the first time, but I've been working on it recently with the HD remaster, and actually taking my time with it, it's a lot more enjoyable, which kind of plays into my advice. Also, Chrono Trigger was mentioned as something you should probably know to see what people are talking about. So instead of that for my SNES suggestion, I'm going to say Illusion of Gaia, which is a predecessor to Terranigma. And it's pretty good. It's a lot easier than Soul Blazer, which is its predecessor. And yeah, I think it's an action RPG, but I think it's worth the time just because it's such a weird environmentalist thing from late 80s. Yeah. Also, Golden Sun. No one talked about the Game Boy Advance, which is kind of surprising.
Or the DS.
The Game Boy Advance. Yeah, the DS is also good.
Or the PSP. Well, Trails in the Sky.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which was a PC game.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, also on the Game Boy Advance. It's basically a Paper Mario game, but not paper and on the go, and I really like it. Also, Monachemia, which is part of the Atelier series of games. You might hear people say it is Atelier because they don't know French, but the series in general has gotten a lot more attention lately because Zeal wrote an article on Atelier Eska and Logi, which is still the worst Japanese title pun, because the particle for and is to, so eschatology, or the study of the end of the world.
Oh god, I hadn't twigged that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Japanese language puns are amazing, and if you want to learn about them, play Kingdom Hearts.
And learn some Japanese.
But yeah, Monachemia is a really, it's a really stereotypical, anime setup where you're a kid with no real memories and you go to an alchemist school and you learn to be an alchemist and you fight stuff and you search for the truth behind your pasts, and you have a pet cat, and there are lots of cute girls and also a guy with a giant, sword that throws shurikens and stuff. That he also turns into a drill because it's an anime. I really like it, though. I think the sequel was a bit bad, but if you can find a way to play it, it's on PS2 or PSP, it's worth the time in my opinion. And finally, because I'm a helpless Tales fan, Tales of Zestiria, it's the most accessible, it's the most recent, and it's really good. And
it's a really good statement of what the franchise is about.
And it's also a really good reminder that JRPGs continue to exist, and even if they do iterate upon the same things for a long time, they are still evolving and they are still changing. So
I'm really glad you two ended up both liking that game, because I was hearing just all kinds of trash talk from when the Japanese release happened.
Yeah,
but then again, that's from Americans who play Japanese language games and import them, so I don't trust those people. As much as we're saying learn Japanese, don't become one of the kinds of people of the current generation of Japanese speaking American nerds. Just don't be those people. Just don't be those people at all.
Yeah.
There are some legit complaints with how Zestiria's launch was handled in Japan, but the game itself is really strong.
Yeah. And it does what it does well. And I'm glad that I spent money on it, a full $50. It's on Steam, which is the first for the series, and they're bringing along Tales of Symphonia, which is my other favorite game from the series, probably, to PC.
I was very tempted to ask you, to what degree are you enjoying Final Fantasy X more, just because you're realizing, oh yeah, this is Tales of Symphonia.
No,
Yeah.
I did make that connection at some point, but
It's a different take on it. And I actually agree. I had a conversation about Solon about this the other day. Is that actually that Colette is probably a stronger character than Yuna, which is really tragic because Yuna's awesome.
Colette is a stronger character, and she's not even like really the primary character because of how all the stuff turns out.
Yeah, which is two structural improvements on Final Fantasy X in a big way. Okay, do we have anywhere else to go with this conversation?
No, let's keep praising Tales of Symphonia.
I don't know. I guess I feel like.
I mean,
I wanted to.
I just want to
go
say,
ahead, LeeRoy.
Yeah. I mean, Devin said the thing about, just keeping an open mind about Japanese media, but I have a current thing I just keep seeing popping up, and I just want to get it out because it's really annoying me, is when FromSoft games are called Western games, and that's...
Oh, no.
They're not. They're not. They're not Western games.
They have structure. As much as I don't like them, they have structure.
Well, it's also just ontologically, they're made by a Japanese developer. You could say Western influence if you want to believe that, which isn't true either. But you cannot call them Western games because it's not true. I saw that.
Gotta love that ethnocentrism.
I saw it again, and
shit.
that's the worst, in my opinion, the worst outgrowth of that. The historical perspective. How we think of JRPGs is that, well, the games that don't fit in the mold of Final Fantasy IV must be the Western games. But no, they're not. They also have a history.
It's also, especially, it's really just an attempt to reclaim, the best Japanese RPG that came out really recently is just a Western RPG anyway. So, why are y'all fuck anime nerds, screwing with the big battle swords and spiky hair? It's just
terrible ethno grandstanding.
I'd call it a lot worse than that, but yeah.
Polite way to say it.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything else. Oh, I would give some shout-outs to other... I really didn't want it to just make it a whole fucking Squarefest, but I would recommend trying to play Xenogears or Xenosaga, just because Tetsuya Takahashi and Soria Saga are two of the most interesting writers. Also Masato Kato, and he contributed to Chrono Trigger, he contributed to FF7, okay. He contributed to FF7, but Chrono Cross is his biggest artistic statement, probably. He also worked on Xenogears. And I think I wanted to try and pick a game that represents JRPGs as something other than fantasy. I think we got at least one or two in there, but in terms of a systemic design thing, it's probably Parasite Eve is the best example to look at of this is a survival horror cop drama thing that's also a JRPG, because the design structure of the JRPG can be foisted onto any story and it works.
Resonance of Fate works too.
Yeah, I guess you're completely right about that too. It's kind of a fantasy story a little bit, but it's a lot more like weird steampunk sci-fi. Yeah. I completely forgot we even talked about Resonance of Fate for 2.5 hours.
Well, it's more also how the gameplay's literal and it's taken away. It's it's its own cyberpunk thing.
I want to mention, for non-strictly fantasy stuff, Tales of Xillia 2. It's sci-fi as hell.
Cool.
It's also grim.
Cool.
And I like it.
All right.
And also, if you're interested in playing Chrono Cross or Xenogears, you might want to just play along when we do the podcast episodes. Shh.
That's true, because we're doing them.
He just said all the Square games. I want to give a shout out to Live a Live, though, because it's really interesting, in my opinion. And it kind of... honestly, it seems like Square's only response to the Earthbound series ever. So, it's pretty cool.
All right. So, I think that just about wraps everything up. Let's do the outro. Thanks for joining us for this episode of GGC. Next month's episode will be on The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky, a JRPG on the PC from Nihon Falcom from 2004 that only saw release in English on the PSP in 2011, and later a revamped and retranslated re-release on PC in 2014. The game we'll be looking at is often referred to as Sora FC to avoid the unfortunate acronym the translations got, and recently got its sequel, Trails in the Sky SC, second chapter, released on Steam and PSN for PSP. Trails in the Sky FC is available on Steam for $20, though most sales will drop it down to about $10. And in addition to next month's game, we're announcing the following game from now on as well, so you folks can get ready ahead of time. These games can take a while to get through, so getting a head start can be helpful. After Trails in the Sky, we'll be playing Chrono Cross, a Squaresoft RPG on the PS1 that's a sequel to Chrono Trigger. It's available on the PSN for $10.
Which I am writing an article about for the arcade review.
How long is Chrono Cross?
I am most of the way through the game, and I want to say it's 40 hours, Critical
okay.
Path. It's actually
please
not...
note,
It's
by the
kind of
way,
a breeze.
When Devon says it's available on PSN, it's not available on UK PSN. It's only America.
Yeah, you have to go to the US, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm
But-
sorry, Europe. I'm so sorry.
But you can still do that. As far as I know, you can just hop over and buy things on alternate stores, which is how some people buy their Japanese games on PlayStation Network, which is good. Join us next time for episode 5 of Dead Genre Chronicles. Bracer yourself for the liberal agenda.
Do you think the next episode will be this long?
Honestly,
I hope
don't think
not.
so. It's a much shorter game that's much simpler.
Yeah, that's what I was
Like,
thinking too. This,
And
By-
we don't have a 45-minute question yet for
Yeah, it's
the
true.
next episode.
I also just wanted to say it's good to be back.
It's good to have you back.
yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
cool. I'll do this all again.
And goodbye, everyone.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.